Chapter 1297. Using the 95 style to attack a group of saber-wielding cavalrymen from a high vantage point, occupying the most advantageous terrain. This was indeed bullying. However, war would not stop just because it was unfair. Here, there was only victory and defeat, only the strong and the weak. There was no reason to speak of. It was rare for them to participate in such a large-scale military operation. The soldiers of the 4th Army Division were extremely excited. As the 3 regimental commanders, they were also extremely excited. They quickly changed from shooting at the soldiers to shooting at the enemy generals. One by one, the Kazakh cavalry's Kiliarchs and Centurions were shot through by the bullets and fell off their horses. The sound of gunfire fell on the Kazakh cavalry, taking away one terrifying blood after another. This caused Keliai's face to turn from white to black, and his body to tremble incessantly. He was just a descendant of the Mongols. He thought that cavalry was the best in the world, and that with a saber and a strong horse, he could gallop through the world. When had he ever seen such a battle before? When the sound of firecrackers echoed in his ears, one by one, the cavalrymen fell off their horses and died without a doubt. This is the firearm soldiers that people speak of? How can they be so powerful? When did they appear beside us? Who can tell me? Under the protection of his personal guards, Keliai was not in danger for the time being. However, when he saw his subordinates dying one after another from time to time, his face was filled with shock and fear. He did not know when he would be like the other soldiers and be shot to death. No one could answer Keliai's question. Many of the superstitious Kazakh cavalry had already regarded the 5-star army as a godly existence. Think about it. If it was not a godly existence, how could they suddenly appear here? If it was not a godly existence, how could they have such a long range and powerful firearm? General, what should we do? What should we do? The 2 captains beside Keliai said in a sobbing voice. In the face of such a long range and powerful firearm, they did not have the slightest ability to fight back. This kind of weapon had already exceeded their imagination. It brought them nothing but fear. Their fighting spirit and morale had already fallen to the extreme. When a person wielding a broadsword is facing a submachine gun, even if you have 1,000 skills, it would be difficult to use them, right? At this moment, these Kazakh cavalry had such mentality. When their fighting spirit had collapsed, they didn't think about how to rush up the canyon. In fact, they didn't have the ability to face the 95 style. The only thing he could do now was to think of a way to escape this hell on earth. What to do? Of course, it was to rush out, but Keliai hadn't decided whether to rush forward or retreat. But soon, someone helped him make the decision. The vanguard fled back. Not only that, there were 2 divisions of 5-star army soldiers behind them. Once he heard that the road ahead was blocked, Keliai did not hesitate and immediately gave the order to retreat. At this moment, he didn't care whether or not this would cause him to trample. He also didn't want to do this. He only wanted to leave this place and get away from the 5-star army. He wanted to get away from death and danger. Finally, there was an order. Although the battlefield was very chaotic, at least there was a direction. The Kazakh cavalry were like a monstrous flood. They finally found an opening to break the dam and quickly retreated. In the process of retreating, under the chaotic situation, who knew how many incidents of infighting occurred? It wasn't just trampling. Sometimes, some cavalry felt that others were blocking their escape route. They felt that others were blocking the way, so they would cut them with their broadswords. It was really like opening a path when you meet a mountain, building a bridge when you meet a river. Blow the bugle call. Standing on the canyon, Yang Chendong looked coldly at everything that was happening in front of him. Especially when he saw that the 2 divisions of New Army's cavalry were forced to stop because of the gunshots and were unable to charge into the Kazakh army, he finally gave the order to charge. Immediately, the gunshots stopped and the loud bugle call sounded. The New Army's cavalry instantly moved and killed their way into the battlefield. As they charged, they shouted loudly, "Those who surrender can live. Those who resist must die." The Kazakh cavalrymen, who had already lost their composure and were scared out of their wits, felt as if they had heard the sound of nature. One by one, they threw down the weapons in their hands, jumped off their war horses and knelt on the ground. The hellish situation was finally coming to an end. Who knew how many cavalry soldiers let out a long sigh of relief? Commander Ling, bring the warriors down to receive the captives. Now that the situation was settled, Yang Chendong's expression was somewhat relaxed as he spoke to Commander Ling Daqiang. Then Yang Chendong turned around and looked at Beta Persei and the two captains Qiu Vi and Dao Xiao who were eager to fight. His face revealed a trace of a smile as he said, "Black cavalry, get on your horses and charge with this king. Kill." Finally, they had a chance to show off their might. The 2,000 black cavalry soldiers excitedly put on their black helmets and black armor. One by one, they raised their sabers and followed Yang Chendong, who was wearing a golden battle robe, towards the entrance of Batian Mound. At this moment, at the entrance, the battle had already begun. With the 1st Cavalry Division's commander, Tian Hu leading more than 18,000 cavalrymen, they had already launched an attack in half an hour. The rear of the army was mainly responsible for transporting rations and supplies. Although they had previously promised the Kazakh army that the 3 provinces would be supplied by the Kazakh army, this time, Kelei had brought a lot of rations from his own country. When he returned, he only needed to ask the other side for the rations. Otherwise, wouldn't he be unable to see the main forces of the 3 countries and not obtain the rations that the army needed? It was precisely because he had brought a lot of provisions that Kelei had arranged for 5,000 elite cavalrymen to guard the rear army. With the existence of these cavalrymen, even if they were attacked, there wouldn't be any problems. As long as they resisted for a while, his main army would quickly come back to help. Everything was arranged well, but when the opponent was the 1st Cavalry Division, this so-called no problem became a big problem. In front of the 1st Cavalry Division, there wasn't a single cavalry unit that couldn't be destroyed. They didn't even use the Big Dipper crossbow, just relying on their strong bows. When the 1st Cavalry Division appeared, they shot 4 arrows in a row. Here, it should be noted that after an ordinary cavalry launched an attack, they would only be able to fire 2 arrows before involuntarily receiving the enemy's attacks. It was already very difficult for the stronger cavalrymen to shoot 3 arrows. However, in the 1st Cavalry Division, they could shoot 4 arrows in a row within a short distance of 100 meters. There were even some who were more powerful who could shoot 5 arrows in a row. With so many arrows flying through the air, the arrows didn't stop after seeing the cavalrymen. After 4 rounds of arrows, at least a third of the 5,000 cavalrymen were killed, and a third of them were injured and couldn't continue fighting. When there were only 1,000 or so cavalrymen left, facing the charge of the 1st Cavalry Division, they were defeated before they could even cause a ripple. A huge opening appeared on the battlefield, allowing the 5-star Army's cavalrymen to pass through. When Yang Chendong arrived with 2,000 black cavalry, he saw the Kazakh cavalrymen lying on the ground, as well as a few soldiers of the 1st Cavalry Division cleaning the battlefield, watching and counting the captives. "You come here." Beta Persei's eyes widened. He pointed to an officer with the rank of captain and asked, "What's going on here? Where's your division commander?" The soldiers who could become the cavalry of the number 1 cavalry division in the world were all 1 in 100, or even 1,000 in the army. To be able to become a company commander, it was unknown how many bloody battles they had experienced and how many meritorious deeds they had achieved. Such a person naturally knew Yang Chendong and the Black Cavalry. When he saw that the person who greeted him was Beta Persei, Bugnam of Gojoseon's personal guard, he quickly trotted over and saluted. "Report, we are cleaning the battlefield and counting the captives and supplies. Our division commander has already led the army in?" Beta Persei, who had long expected this result, couldn't help but ask anxiously, "How long has it been?" "It's been nearly half an hour." As an officer of the 5-star army, he was used to the saying of 24 hours. When he reported, he naturally answered with such a rule. "Hiss." Beta Persei sucked in a breath of cold air, his face a little bitter. "It's been half an hour, this Tian whose speed is really fast. Young master, what do you think? Let's catch up." Yang Chendong also knew that his idea of participating in a big battle was probably going to be dashed, but since he came, how could he return empty-handed? He had to go to the battlefield to take a look. "Yes, let's go." At that moment, the 2,000 black cavalry rushed straight ahead, leaving behind billowing smoke and dust. At this moment, on the battlefield, one side was completely overwhelming the other side. Under the protection of his personal guards, Clay finally managed to escape from the center of the army. Just as he had a glimmer of hope, he quickly lost all hope. This was because he saw General Toljan, who was supposed to be in charge of the rear army. Thorjan had been chased here by the 1st Cavalry Division with less than 10,000 cavalrymen in the sky. It wasn't that he didn't think of resisting, but when he saw his rear army facing the world's 1st Cavalry Division and couldn't even parry, he knew that this was the elite of the elite. It wasn't something he could handle. He wanted to rush to the center of the army to meet up with General Kellii and use the advantage of numbers to kill his way back. Who would have thought that the situation in the Middle Army was worse than the situation in the Middle Army? When he saw that General Clay only had less than 3,000 to 4,000 cavalry around him, and their formation was in chaos, he knew that things were not going well. Chapter 1298. Why are you here? When Kellii saw General Toljan, his face was also filled with fear. He instantly thought of a possibility, and his heart sank to the bottom. Since the enemy had set up an ambush on both sides of the canyon, why didn't they know to cut off his escape route? It was ridiculous that he thought that going back was the only way out. This was the 5-star Army's plan. However, there was another problem. How did so many 5-star Army soldiers appear here? Didn't the scout report that there were no 5-star Army units around here? The 5-star Army had only invested a total of over 200,000 soldiers on the battlefield. Shouldn't their main force be on the way to the Forsaken City? Where did the 5-star Army come from? There were countless questions in his mind, but no one could answer him. Because at this moment, the 1st Cavalry Division and the new army from the front had already surrounded them. He only had about 10,000 cavalry with him, but looking at the cavalry of the 5-star Army in front and behind him, both groups seemed to have more soldiers than him. Moreover, he was going to be attacked from both sides. It was obvious what the outcome would be. General, what should we do? Toljan, who was still holding his saber, couldn't help but ask. He wanted to charge out like a man, but he knew that it was an impulsive action. It was simply suicide. Those who surrender can live. Those who resist must die. The shouts from the front and back were deafening. Tens of thousands of 5-star Army soldiers roared. The Kazakh cavalrymen who were trapped here trembled. They looked at the front and back and didn't know what to do. What should we do? What else can we do? Surrender. Seeing that the situation was about to change, Kellii let out a long sigh and threw the saber in his hand to the ground. Then he jumped off his horse and squatted down with his hands covering his head. As Kellii took the initiative to dismount and surrender, the cavalrymen around him all followed suit. A battle of 200,000 people ended just like that. From noon to the morning of the 3rd day, around 15,000 Kazakh cavalrymen were killed in less than 24 hours. In the chaos, another 15,000 were trampled and 70,000 were captured. Another great victory appeared. Not only did they completely eliminate 100,000 Kazakh cavalrymen, but they also cleared a large obstacle for the 5-star Army to take over the entire Ili region. Eliminating 100,000 cavalrymen in 2 days, this speed could only be achieved by the current 5-star Army. If it wasn't for the fact that there were too many captives, they wouldn't even need to waste this much time. Everyone has worked hard. Rest for 2 days. At the same time, send out a regiment from the 1st Cavalry Division, a regiment from the 4th Army Division, and a division from the new army to look after the captives. The most important thing is to change their minds and try to make them useful. Those who surrender will be given priority to join the new army's 1st Cavalry Division. Let's rebuild the platform first. As for what happens next, we might as well stab the rear of the city. It is time to deal with their problem. Yang Chendong's words were shocking. Wiping out 100,000 cavalrymen in one go allowed Yang Chendong to have a better understanding of the strength of an army. He was no longer satisfied with the small victories, and set his sights on the 160,000-strong Turpan army. If they were to forcefully attack, even if they could take down the city, the losses would not be small. After all, in the face of so many Turpan soldiers, even if they broke through the city gate, the following street battle would not be so easy. But now it was different. He had just captured Kazakh generals Kelii and Togun. Coincidentally, these two people had participated in the Five-Nation Coalition War before. Many Turpan people knew them. With such a magic weapon in hand, it would be a waste if he didn't make good use of it. Beta Persei, take good care of our two friends. Make sure they are obedient, but make sure they don't get any external injuries on their faces. After Yang Chendong assigned the task to Beta Persei, he led the Black Cavalry and left. If it was someone else who said that they were going to attack Kazakh, the other generals would have some concerns and hesitation. But since it was Yang Chendong who said it, no one doubted it. Everyone thought it was a matter of course. In 2 full days, the political cadres achieved remarkable results. They successfully persuaded more than half of the 40,000 captives to join the 5-star army. The rest did not seem to be a problem. Not only did this make up for the original losses, but it also increased the number of soldiers. Beta Persei did not let Yang Chendong down. After a good reception, both Kelii and Togun surrendered. After becoming prisoners, they had no other choice. They could either surrender or die. In the face of life and death, not many people could really not frown. With 40,000 more captives and persuading Kelii and Togun to join him, Yang Chendong knew that the time for the decisive battle had come. He called the generals around him and gave them the next task. In the big tent, Tian Hu, Ling Daqiang, Suhi Kalu and others had almost rested. At this moment, they were looking at Yang Chendong, who was sitting in the first place, with admiring eyes, waiting for the next battle order. Seeing everyone's spirit, Yang Chendong nodded in satisfaction. With so many powerful generals in his hands, what was there to worry about? Announce the order. After the 4 words were spoken, all the military commanders trembled. They puffed out their chests and waited for the order. Order: Kalu's 1st Cavalry Division will be rebuilt from the captives. After it's done, take 30,000 captives who don't surrender to Turpan and hand them over to the 5-star army. They'll be sent to the logistics headquarters in the first city in batches. Many places are undergoing major construction and need a lot of labor. Since these people don't want to bow their heads, they'll serve as laborers. Each of them will be sentenced to at least 20 years. If they perform well, their sentences can be reduced appropriately. Kalu was called out. Although it was a pity that he could not participate in the upcoming battle, escorting so many young and strong captives was also a big deal. Wasn't this the 6th young master's trust in him? He hurriedly agreed. When the other commanders heard that they had to serve for 20 years, they could not help but break out in a cold sweat. That was the most glorious 20 years of a man's life. It could be imagined that they would be little old men after the time was up. They probably wouldn't be able to do anything in life. But on the other hand, who could they blame for this? They dared to not surrender after becoming captives. It was already a good thing that they were not killed. After dealing with the captives, Yang Chendong said for the 2nd time, "Order Suhi's new army to take the lead. Escort 30,000 Kazakh captives to the city gate. Try to give a fatal blow to the leadership in the shortest time possible to assist in the upcoming street battles in the city, and seize the absolute initiative. Of course, if we can persuade the other party to work for us, that would be the best. Well, Kelii and Thorjen can be used by you. Act according to the situation." Yes. Suhi, who heard the order, quickly responded with a military salute. Although Kalu's 1st Cavalry Division was missing in this battle, there were more than 30,000 captives. In this way, he had more than 50,000 troops in his hands, which made his confidence soar. Order the 4th Army Division and the 1st Cavalry Division to cover the rear. When the new army enters the city and opens the city gate, look for an opportunity to destroy the enemy. Yes. Ling Daqiang and Tian, who both stood at attention and answered. Although they couldn't take the first credit this time, they didn't complain. They all knew that street battles were the most chaotic battles. They didn't want to fight with their elites like this. Yang Chendong must have considered this point and made this decision. As soon as the order was given, the army quickly moved. The officers all carried out their duties, and the army sped up towards Kalisi city. At the same time, Yang Chendong also notified the 1st Regiment of the 4th Army Division, the Liaodong Cavalry Division, the Far Eastern Army's 1st Cavalry Division, the Light Cavalry Regiment, and the reconnaissance regiment that had already conquered Khaleesi City to speed up their march towards Khaleesi City. At that time, they would surround the 4 cities and not let a single enemy escape. A large net was being cast towards Khaleesi City. At this time, King Hardenbarter didn't know about this. The gates of Kuansi City, the northern gateway city, were quickly blasted open by the 5-star Army's artillery bombardment. The cavalry took the opportunity to charge in and occupy the city. The king was currently organizing the army in his hands and making the corresponding arrangements for the war. The 5-star Army relied on their powerful cannons to achieve victory. In Hardenbarter's eyes, while at the same time he was extremely shocked. Regarding this, he specially called his General Daichin to discuss how to deal with this. General Daichin, who thought that he was already familiar with the 5-star Army's tactics, didn't panic. In his view, no matter how strong the tactics were, there was still a way to deal with it. For example, if the same method was used on Khaleesi City, he wasn't that afraid. He had a total of 160,000 soldiers. Although most of them were new recruits and because of insufficient preparation, many of them only had weapons and didn't even have war horses, it was still 160,000 people. With such a number of soldiers, even if the 5-star Army broke open the city gates, it would still be very difficult for them to enter the city. At that time, they only needed to send the soldiers to the streets to block them. With the geographical advantage, it wasn't impossible for them to fight. Once they held on for too long, when reinforcements appeared, it would be time for them to counterattack. In General Daichin's eyes, the 5-star Army wasn't without weaknesses. For example, the lack of manpower was a very important disadvantage. Not to mention 1 versus 1, even 2 versus 1, he believed that in the end the 5-star Army would be the one who couldn't hold on. He didn't want to win. He only wanted to protect himself while hurting the 5-star Army at the same time. Chapter 1299. On this point, King Hardenbarter had the same view. The 5-star Army, who had a huge appetite, would definitely not lose too many soldiers in Forklift. As long as he could hold on, the 5-star Army would retreat without attacking. Very good, General Daichin. I will hand these 160,000 soldiers over to me. You will be in charge of the arrangements in the city in order to deplete the strength of the 5-star Army to the greatest extent. Yes, I will not disappoint my king. Daichin cupped his fists and said. He had suffered too many defeats recently, and it was rare for the king to trust him so much. It was time for him to display his strength and let others know that his title as the #1 general of Turpan was not just for show. In reality, Daichin had some ability, otherwise, he wouldn't have been so highly regarded by Hardenbarter. Unfortunately, his opponent was the 5-star Army. Facing such a huge force, it wasn't possible to rely on a single person to turn the situation around. Daichin tried his best to arrange for troops to be stationed in the important areas of the city. He only placed a small amount of troops at the city gates. He was a person who knew when to advance and when to retreat. He knew that the city walls of Forklift would not be able to stop the bombardment of the 5-star Army. At this time, Forklift City was in chaos. Many soldiers used the excuse of defending the important areas to seize the properties and ancestral homes of many rich people. As a result, the commoners complained and many people had no homes to return to. This was war, and the ones who suffered the most were the commoners at the bottom. Prices rose, safety was not guaranteed, and they lost their jobs. Their goal in life changed from how to live well to how to survive. It was truly a tragedy. Among the many properties that were taken over, 20 to 30 Turfan soldiers rushed into an unassuming silk shop. They used this place as an important reason to force the people here to leave, not allowing them to take any of their belongings. The sudden influx of so many Turfan soldiers holding short knives and spears caused a light to flash in the eyes of the guards in the shop. Their right hand habitually reached for their waist. They all had knives and could fight with the incoming soldiers. Everyone stop, calm down. A woman in a lavender dress with a white veil over her face walked out, escorted by a few maids. She softly stopped the guards from moving, before taking small steps forward to welcome the Turpan soldiers who had barged into the manor. Gentlemen, you are. Her voice was as clear and crisp as an oriole's, and it sounded very pleasant to the ears. This voice attracted the attention of all the Turkmen soldiers. One of the captains at the front had a primitive desire for beauty in his eyes as he strode forward to welcome the newcomer. As he walked, he said, "Oh, there's a beauty here. Ha ha ha, come, let this lord take a look at your charming little face." As he spoke, he had already arrived in front of the woman. At the same time, he reached out his hand and tore off the white veil. The greater the hope, the greater the disappointment. Perhaps the woman's appearance was too stunning, so the captain had high expectations of her appearance. However, when the white veil was torn off, a face full of black spots appeared before him, causing him to stop in his tracks. Following that, he felt a wave of nausea in his stomach. Clearly, he was disgusted by the ugly appearance of the woman. Not only was her skin dark, there were also black spots on it. She was truly ugly to the extreme. It was hard to imagine how a woman like her could have such a pleasant voice and a decent figure. The woman's appearance frightened the captain. His hand that was hovering in the air quickly dropped. The teasing tone in his voice turned serious. "Are you the manager of this place? Let me tell you, this place has been expropriated. Leave this place immediately. Remember, you are not allowed to take any belongings. Otherwise, don't blame us for not recognizing you with our weapons." Expropriated. The woman put the white veil back on her face, completely concealing her shock. After she regained her composure, she nodded and said, "So that's how it is. Then we are only bringing some clothes to change into. Is that okay? You also know that we women always like to be beautiful." As the woman spoke, a piece of silver appeared in her sleeve and handed it to the captain. When he heard the woman say that she liked to be beautiful, the captain wanted to vomit. If it wasn't for the sake of the silver, he was afraid that he would have already flung her away. But since he had received the benefits, he had to do something. "Okay, hurry up. You can only pack some clothes. You are not allowed to take anything valuable." "Okay, we will listen to you." The woman quickly nodded, then turned around and said to the 4 women who followed her, "Go pack a little. Sigh, I don't know when these days will end and where we will live." The women moved quickly. After a while, each of them came out with a cloth bag. Seeing how weak they were and how easy it was for them to carry the cloth bag, the captain knew that there was nothing valuable in it. He immediately waved his hand and without even checking he said, "Okay, you have taken the things. Quickly leave." "Yes, sir." After the ugly woman bowed, she led the 4 maids and 4 guards out of the silk shop. When they reached the main street, they saw many homeless commoners and merchants just like them. Among them, there was no lack of people who were crying and wailing. The homes they relied on for survival had been occupied, and their wealth had been plundered clean. There were even some who had slightly beautiful women in their homes who had been snatched away. If there was any resistance, those soldiers would brandish their swords and kill them mercilessly. The various scenes that happened made the commoners feel as if the sky was falling and the earth was sinking. At this moment, other than crying loudly on the streets outside their homes, they seemed to be unable to do anything else. "Sister Nyan, it seems like they didn't come for us. We were just caught in the crossfire." After coming out and seeing what was happening outside, one of the maids said in a low voice. The so-called Sister Nyan was the ugly woman wearing a white veil. Her full name was Sun Nyan. Of course, the so-called silk shop and the face that made people not want to see it a second time were all a disguise. She was still very beautiful. After all, to be selected by the CIA and become a team leader, she had to pass the test in terms of beauty first. Yes, these Turpan soldiers have all gone crazy. How can the city not be in chaos when they treat the people like this? How can the country not be destroyed? Sister Nyan shook her head. Then she asked in a low voice, "Did you bring everything out?" "We brought everything out. We took apart the radio and held it in our hands. It was a close call just now. If they really wanted to search the package, I'm afraid we would have to fight." The guard who was asked was also a member of the CIA. He said with lingering fear, "It's good that you brought it out." Sister Nyan nodded. If they really had to fight to the death just now, she wouldn't have been worried. The 8 of them had all undergone professional training. Under a sudden attack, 20 to 30 ordinary Turpan soldiers wouldn't be a match for them. However, that would easily expose their identities. Since they were out, of course they couldn't go back. After thinking for a moment, she said, "Let's go to the fourth safe house. Then report this matter and wait for orders." The so-called fourth safe house was a residence of the rich and powerful in the city. Normally, they wouldn't go there because the security there was tight, and it was inconvenient to move around. However, it was the only place where they wouldn't be harassed. It was the safest place. Sister Nian brought the 8 people to the fourth safe house. The radio was quickly set up. Then they contacted their superiors and received new orders. Seeing this order that had to be completed, Sun Nian was a little shocked. This mission wasn't easy to complete. Even if they wanted to complete it, they would lose a lot of people. However, when she saw that it was the 6th young master's order, she didn't hesitate at all. Even if it was young Qindong's order, so what if all of them were to be sacrificed? Go and inform all the team members in the city to come here for a meeting. There's an important mission. Sun Nian said to her subordinates in an excited voice. The city was in chaos. Cries and screams could be heard everywhere. However, the people in power in Torpon didn't care about this at all. Compared to the suffering of the people, they cared more about their own safety. Especially when they found out that the main force of the 5-star army had arrived at the North Gate and could attack at any time. Many of the officials couldn't sit still. They didn't know if they could defend the city this time. Could they stop the 5-star army? Just when everyone was worried, a piece of good news came into the city. The 100,000 Kazakh cavalry reinforcements had arrived outside the city. They had already appeared at the South Gate. It was said that the General Daichin had already brought people to welcome them. Aya, the heavens bless us. After finding out that there were 100,000 reinforcements, many of the Torpon officials in the city were very happy. In their view, with the help of these 100,000 cavalrymen, they would have more confidence in defending Forokai's city. At this moment, outside the South City, General Daichin was thinking the same thing. When he learned that the Kazakh cavalry had arrived outside the city, he immediately reported the news to the king. If it wasn't for the chaos in the city, the king of Hadenbar would have personally come out to greet them. General Daichin came to Kelly with a face full of joy. He stretched out his arms and gave Kelly a warm hug. To him, the appearance of the 100,000 Kazakh cavalry was like a ray of light in the dark night. It was the hope that they could persevere. Chapter 1300. Perhaps because he was too excited, Daichin didn't notice Kelly's ugly expression until he hugged him and felt his body stiffen. He then asked in surprise, "General Kelly, are you not feeling well?" Kelly bitterly smiled. He wanted to say that he was no longer a general, but a captive. However, he knew that there was a gun pointed at him from the side. He had seen the power of a gun before. Taking his life within 30 meters was as easy as stepping on an ant. Not to mention that the 2 people in charge of monitoring him were less than 10 meters away from him. He definitely didn't dare to gamble, and didn't want to die. If he didn't want to die, then he had to follow the 5-star army's request. Kelly could only bitterly say, "General Daichin, I don't know if it's convenient, but I have something to say to you." It was this sentence that made Daichin, who had a trace of doubt, let down his guard. He thought that Kelly had something that he couldn't say, which was why his expression wasn't good. Considering that Kelly was here to help him, if there was a problem he should help him. Thus he nodded and said, "Of course it's convenient. We are friends so we can talk about anything." Okay. Kelly was waiting for this sentence. After he finished speaking, he turned around and said, "If that's the case, then please follow me. What I want to say is confidential, and I don't want too many people to know." Facing Kelly's request, Daichin didn't think too much. He only thought that Kelly was talking about conditions. After all, this was the help of 100,000 cavalry. If it was him, he would also make some requests. Thus, he only brought a few people and followed Kelly to the side of the cavalry army. When he walked in, Daichin noticed that there was a group of people waiting for him. Among them was an old acquaintance, Kazakh's General Toljan. It was because of this person's existence that he didn't think too much and continued to walk behind Kelly. General Daichin thought that he still had a long way to go, But Halieri suddenly stopped and turned around with a bitter smile on his face. But this time he didn't say anything. Instead, someone beside him spoke. General Daichin, I didn't think that we would meet here. How have you been? The person who spoke was the commander of the new army, Suhi. With regards to this person, Daichin naturally had a deep impression of him. Thinking back to the time when he brought his army to fight against him, he was defeated. That was the greatest humiliation to him. He curiously looked at the other party and didn't say anything. Hundreds of thoughts flashed through his mind. How could this person be so similar to the commander of the 5-star army? Without an answer, Daichin turned his gaze to Halieri. Clearly he wanted an answer. Why would the Kazakh cavalry walk together with a general of the 5-star army? Seeing that Daichin wanted to hear an explanation or an introduction, Halieri reluctantly said, Then let me introduce you. This is General Suhi. He is the commander of the new army of the 5-star army. After saying this, Halieri hurriedly moved his head to the side. Clearly, this betrayal of an ally made him very embarrassed. If possible, he wanted to find a hole to hide in. Hearing the introduction, General Daichin saw that the other party was indeed the commander of the new army of the 5-star army. His expression changed and his right hand habitually reached for his waist. Clearly, he had already felt the existence of danger. Unfortunately, it was already too late for him to react. Military Commander Suhi's guards, who had been observing all this from the side, stepped forward first. Two of them restrained Daichin from the left and right, pressing down on his shoulders so that his body couldn't move. At the same time, the bodyguards behind him were also restrained. All of this was done silently. Because it was far from the Turpan army, it didn't attract anyone's attention. Suddenly being restrained, General Daichin's face was naturally filled with anger. He looked at Halieri, who had just turned around and scolded loudly. Halieri, I trusted you so much. You actually surrendered to the 5-star army. You coward you. Enough. Suhi said with a look of disdain. Then he looked at the furious Daichin and said, Wanting to live isn't about being afraid of death. It's about seeing if there's any meaning in dying. Come bring him here. After Suhi's words, a man who looked like a housekeeper was escorted over from the crowd. This was an old man over 50 years old. His appearance was nothing special, but when he appeared in Daichin's eyes, it really made him pale with fright. He didn't have time to scold Halieri, and asked nervously, Housekeeper, why are you here? The person who came was Daichin's housekeeper. He had followed Daichin for tens of years and could be said to be his most trusted person. For him to appear here really surprised Daichin. But very quickly his face changed again and again. He suddenly thought of something. As expected, after seeing Daichin, the old housekeeper cried painfully and said, Master, madam, young general and the ladies were all captured by them. You have to make a decision. Ah. After hearing this, Daichin's whole body shook. He then used all of his strength to try and break free. It was just that the 5-star army was already prepared, and this strength was quickly suppressed. Unable to break free, Daichin could only curse. You bastards, if you dare to hurt a single hair of my family, I swear I will take your lives. Daichin was still shouting, looking like he was about to fight to the death. Suhi, who had already expected this, wasn't in a hurry. After a while, when the other party seemed to have vented enough and was about to use up all of his strength, he said, Your family is naturally very safe and well protected. But whether or not they will be safe will depend on General Daichin's choice. If you still want to work for the hardened Bartle that is about to be destroyed, then you have no one to blame. Threat. It was a blatant threat. On the battlefield, in order to win, one would do anything, not to mention against a foreign race. When Suhi was ordered to do this, he didn't feel any pressure at all. Now that the words had been spoken, all that was left was for General Daichin to make his own choice. He was tired of scolding and shouting. At this moment, Daichin finally calmed down. But from his undulating chest, he seemed to be struggling and didn't have the intention to make a decision. Humph. You are so stubborn. Suhi was determined to help him make a decision. General Daichin, you are a good man, but your actions are really disgraceful. Think about it. You first betrayed the old King Jiaxi and helped harden Bartle take the throne. Now that the old king is dead, are you worthy of him? Also, everyone says you are a person who loves your soldiers like your children. Are you willing to watch your brothers make unnecessary sacrifices? Think about the citizens in the city. Most of them are homeless and have no food to eat. Every day you delay, who knows how many people will die because of various reasons. Although you are not the main culprit, you are an important accomplice. May I ask, who are you worthy of? When you die one day, will you have the face to face those who died unjustly? Every word landed on Daiqin's heart, causing his expression to change again and again. Very quickly, he was like a deflated balloon, unable to be as stubborn as before. Thinking about his actions recently, it was really as Suhi said. He was not a good man. How did he become a person who had no king, no father, no brothers and no citizens? Suhi also saw Daiqin's thoughtful expression and knew there was hope. He continued. People say that if you know you are wrong, you should change. As long as you turn back now, it is not too late. Because you made the right choice, I believe many people will thank you. This is also your only chance to redeem yourself. Where to go? Quickly make your choice. The group had been delayed here for a while, and it was inevitable that people would think too much. What they needed to do now was to end this quickly. If Daiqin cooperated with him, that would be the best. But if he didn't, then they would just kill their way into the city. The only difference was that it would take more effort, and more people would die. Suhi's words were like a hammer that smashed heavily on Daiqin's chest. Finally, after some hesitation, he made the decision to cooperate. Okay, I am willing to cooperate with the 5-star army, but I hope you won't start a massacre in the city. Finally agreeing, Suhi let out a sigh of relief and nodded. General Daiqin, please don't worry about this. We won't harm the citizens. After all, these people will become Yangxie's citizens in the future. As for the soldiers in the city, as long as they don't resist, we promise we won't do anything to them. Okay. Hearing this promise, Daiqin's face revealed a relieved expression. Maybe Suhi was right. What he was going to do now was to redeem himself for his previous mistakes. Since Daiqin agreed to cooperate, the next step was naturally much easier. He first gathered all the generals under him and started to persuade them to surrender under the encirclement of the new army of the 5-star army. Daiqin really treated his subordinates well. After he revealed his intentions, and with the deterrence of the 5-star army, no one objected and everyone agreed to follow the general's decision. This was something that couldn't be helped. The 5-star army had already killed their way into the city. At this time, there was no point in resisting. Instead, they would sacrifice their own lives. And this kind of meaningless sacrifice was something no one was willing to do. Chapter 1301. With the cooperation of the generals under Daiqin Yu, the 5-star army quickly entered the city. Following the request, all the Turfan soldiers who agreed to enter had a red rope tied around their right arm, as a sign of distinction. Then the army entered the city. Along the way, no one stopped them, and no one came to stop them. This didn't mean that the situation was settled. Because Daiqin was riding at the front, many soldiers didn't know what was going on. Furthermore, the military power of Turpan wasn't completely in Daiqin's hands. The tiger seal was still in the hands of King Hardenbarter. If they didn't convince him, the problem wouldn't be solved. Daiqin, who also knew this, unexpectedly volunteered to enter the temporary palace to see Hardenbarter. He wanted to persuade him. This was also the best way he could redeem himself. This idea was good, but Suhi didn't think highly of this mission. Especially when he thought about what Yang Qindong told him before they came. In Turpan, anyone could surrender except for King Hardenbarter. To others, surrendering was just a transfer from one faction to another. Perhaps their position would be demoted, but they would still have to listen to someone else's orders. But to their masters it was completely different. They would fall from their high position and become prisoners. This was something that was hard to accept. General Daiqin, your idea is good, but how confident are you in convincing Hardenbarter? Suhi asked the question in front of everyone. As expected, Daiqin revealed a troubled expression. He then said 30%. 30%? That won't do. That's too low. You're just sending yourself to death. Hearing this answer, Suhi immediately rejected. Now Daichin was his captive. Since he was his captive, he had the right and responsibility to ensure his safety. Daichin wasn't angry that his request was rejected. Instead, he was happy. This proved that Daichin cared about him. This touched him a little. But because of this, he decided to do this. This was his way of returning the favor. General Su, please agree to my request. This is indeed a bit risky, but if it succeeds, the benefits will be great. The hundreds of thousands of soldiers in the city will no longer have to suffer the pain of war, and the people will be able to live a peaceful life again. It's just a risk, but it's worth it. What Daichin said made sense. Suhi hesitated for a moment. Since he was going to be the vanguard, he naturally hoped to complete the task beautifully. By the time the sixth young master arrived, all the problems would have been solved. What kind of contribution would that be? Seeing that Suhi didn't immediately reject him, Daichin felt that there was hope. He hurriedly said, General Su, I will do my best to ensure my own safety. I will use the excuse of welcoming General Kelly to bring some soldiers into the temporary palace. General Su can also send some 5-star army to follow. If it really doesn't work, we can still retreat. This wasn't a bad idea. Suhi thought about it for a moment before nodding in agreement. No matter what, if there was a chance, it was worth a try. If worse came to worst, he could just leave the palace. With his new army already in Khaleesi City, he definitely had the ability to provide support outside the palace. Just like that, the two quickly discussed some things. At the same time, they also convinced General Toljan of Kazakh to represent Kelly and follow Daichin into the temporary palace. This way, not only could they bring more soldiers, they could also look after each other. To ensure everyone's safety, Suhi gathered 200 new army warriors and gave them to Lei Chuandang, the commander of the 3rd Cavalry Division. Commander Lei, it would be best if this succeeds. If it doesn't, you must protect the safety of the two generals. I will bring the army to provide support outside the palace. Rest assured I will complete the mission. After the tall and mighty Lei Chuandang gave a military salute, he took off his 5-star army uniform and changed into the uniform of the Kazakh soldiers. After everything was prepared, under Daichin's familiar guidance, he brought 50 guards, plus Lei Chuandang and Toljan's 200 guards, a total of 253 people to the temporary palace of the Turpan Kingdom. A king was a king. Even if the donkey didn't fall, it wouldn't fall. Even though Turpan had already lost a large amount of land and people, and even their country, after arriving in Khaleesi, under Hardenbarter's orders, they quickly built a new palace. Even though it wasn't as glorious as before due to the lack of time, it still took up a lot of space. Just from the outside, they had to go through 3 gates and 3 checks before they could enter. With Daichin leading the way, they were naturally unobstructed. At this moment in the palace hall, King Hardenbarter was waiting to meet with Kelly. Beside Hardenbarter, Generals Tushi and Gengel stood on the left and right. From time to time, they would stretch their necks and look outside the hall. Clearly, they were a bit anxious. What's going on? Didn't you say that everyone was here? Why isn't he here yet? Finally, Hardenbarter's eyes showed a trace of annoyance. No matter what, he was still the king of a country. Even though Kelly came to help him, it wasn't right to make him wait for so long. Seeing that the king's tone was a bit unhappy, the two generals on the side lowered their heads and didn't dare to make a sound. This new king was not as good-tempered as the old King Siza, especially now that the army was constantly retreating. Just yesterday, one of his servants was dragged out to be beheaded because he accidentally broke a piece of porcelain. With this as an example, everyone had to be more careful. No one answered his question, so Kelly coldly snorted. He didn't want to cause trouble for the two generals. After all, he still needed them to defend the city. After waiting for a while, when Hardenbarter's face showed his annoyance again, a palace servant finally ran in and knelt on the ground. Your Majesty, General Daichin is back. Together with him is General Toljan of the Kazakh Kingdom. Finally they're here. Hardenbarter quickly sat up straight. At the same time he was a bit confused. Didn't Kelly come? Why didn't he come to see me? With this question in mind, when Daichin and Toljan entered the heavily guarded hall, Hardenbarter asked, "Why don't I see General Kelly?" Toljan, who had long prepared his speech, put his right hand in front of his chest and maintained his customary etiquette. "Honorable King of Turpan, our General Kelly caught a cold and is now resting in the army." After saying this, Thorjan shut his mouth. Then he looked around and began to observe the environment in the hall. When he saw 8 armored turban soldiers around the hall and 2 tiger generals beside King Haddenbarth, he knew that it was impossible to use the strategy of capturing the leader first to catch the bandits. Now he could only find an opportunity to rush out after Daichin said what he wanted. Luckily, Lei Chuan led more than 200 warriors outside the hall to support him. As long as he was fast enough, there shouldn't be any danger. As for whether General Daichin's persuasion would succeed, he didn't have any hope. Toljan closed his mouth and it was Daichin's turn to speak. He needed to find an excuse for being late, so he said, "Your Majesty, General Kelly is indeed not feeling well. Luckily, I've already asked after him on behalf of Your Majesty. Please forgive me for being late." "I see. Everything is right." Hardenbarter nodded without thinking too much. Soon he asked what he wanted to ask. "Is General Kelly all right? It won't affect our cooperation to deal with the 5 Stars army, right?" At this moment, Daichin had a headache because of this question. Now that the 5-star army had already entered the city, the destruction of Turban was inevitable. The only difference was that fewer soldiers and civilians would die. This was also the reason why he had to make this trip. He wanted to use his own efforts to protect the lives of more soldiers and civilians. Thinking that because of his actions, he might be able to save a lot of people, he gathered his courage and said to Hardenbarter, "Your Majesty, do you think that even if we join forces with the 100,000 Kazakh soldiers, we can really stop the powerful 5-star army?" Just as he was waiting for a definite answer, Daichin suddenly said this. Hardenbarter's expression changed again and again. He didn't understand why this important official would say such a thing. Of course, he couldn't answer this question, but did he have a choice? "General Daichin, what do you mean? Do you not think that our 2 armies can work together?" Hardenbarter didn't understand and asked back. He didn't think that Daichin would answer this question very straightforwardly. "Yes, Your Majesty, I don't think so. In my opinion, even if we join forces with General Kelly, we won't be able to change the situation. If we do that, we will just be throwing away the lives of innocent soldiers and civilians." The sudden answer stunned Tushi and General Gengel, who were standing on both sides of the room. They didn't think that their subordinate General Daichin would see the situation in front of them like this. Although they were also terrified of the arrival of the 5-star army and didn't have much confidence in winning, they shouldn't be so pessimistic. Hardenbarter, who was sitting on the throne, also had his eyes wide open. After a few breaths, his chest heaved as he asked, "Daichin, what do you mean by that? Are you going to surrender to the 5-star army?" It was no wonder that Hardenbarter would think like this. This was too obvious a discussion about surrendering to the enemy. Anyone else would think too much. Chapter 1302. Of course, Hardenbarter didn't doubt Daichin's loyalty. After all, during this period of time, this person had been supporting him. If this person had already surrendered to the 5-star army, the situation would have been much worse. Hardenbarter didn't doubt Daichin, he just said this out of anger. But after he said this, what he didn't expect was that Daichin actually admitted to it. He first nodded and then said with a very certain tone, "Yes, Your Majesty. Your servant has already surrendered to the 5-star army. Now the 5-star army has already disguised themselves as the Kazakh army and entered the city. This time, your servant came to persuade Your Majesty to surrender. Please don't fight for the sake of the soldiers and the people. Otherwise, you will only lose more miserably and even lose your life." As if he was afraid that Hardenbarter wouldn't give him a chance to speak, Daichin spoke very quickly and clearly. He could guarantee that he would say everything he wanted to say in a very short period of time. Hardenbarter could also hear it very clearly. This was also a test for people. And with every sentence that Daichin said, Harden Barter's face became more and more ugly. When Daiqin finished speaking, his face was already as gloomy as water. His murderous eyes stared at Daiqin again and again as if he wanted to get to know this person again. Then he suddenly roared. Innocent? How can there be innocent people in a war? Since they are the generals and citizens of Turkmenistan, they should protect this country with this king. If this king is no longer here, there is no need for them to continue living. You, on the other hand, have been put in an important position by this king, but now you are actually helping others. How disappointing. After saying this, Harden Barter suddenly raised his right hand and pointed at Daiqin. You are a person without a king or father. Come, take down this cowardly person for this king. Yes. The 8 palace guards standing on the left and right of the palace immediately responded and rushed towards where Daiqin was standing. Just as they started to move, a short wooden table flew over and blocked the path of the imperial bodyguards. Naturally, it was Thorgen who did it. He had been observing the environment in the hall and was prepared to make a move at any time. Just as the guards agreed, he stared at the small wooden table that was originally prepared for Kelly. He reached out with both hands, picked it up, and threw it out with force. Taking advantage of the flying wooden table, Thorgen grabbed Daiqin's hand and quickly retreated until he reached the main door of the palace and kicked it open. 2 silhouettes also quickly rushed out. Catch them, we can't let them escape. Seeing that Daiqin and the other person were about to escape, Harden Barter's eyes turned red as if they were spitting fire. Under his shouts, the 8 palace guards rushed out together. At this moment, Lei Chuan, who was in charge of receiving them from outside the palace, was also prepared. The moment he saw Daiqin and the other person rush out, he pulled out his sword and slashed towards the palace guard closest to him, who was completely defenseless. As Lei Chuandeng made his move, it was like a signal. The dozens of warriors behind him all pulled out their swords and rushed towards different targets. In an instant, blood splashed everywhere and the palace became a mess. Let's go. Thorgen quickly pulled Daiqin back to Lei Chuandong's side and took a sword from him, holding it horizontally in front of him as he yelled. Lei Chuanding didn't need Thorgen to say anything to know that they couldn't stay here any longer, because in his vision, there were already countless guards rushing towards them. He slashed forward with his sword and pushed back a palace guard. At the same time he shouted to all his subordinates, "Retreat, kill a path of blood." Kill. The dozens of warriors said in unison. Then they turned around and retreated according to the path they came from. At this moment, not only in the courtyard, but also at the 3 gates of the palace, it was already a mess. Along the way, Lei Chuandong's group had more than 100 brothers at the gates of the top 3 academies. There were exactly 60 people at each intersection. When chaos broke out in the palace, these 180 warriors immediately pulled out their blades and slashed at the palace guards beside them. Taking advantage of the chaos, Lei Chuan and his men charged out of the courtyard and arrived in front of the first gate. They met up with the soldiers of the 5-star army and continued to charge out. With every step they took, someone would fall beside them. With every step they took, there would be a palace guard who would be killed by a blade. What are you waiting for? Hurry up and chase after them. Seeing that Daiqin still hadn't arrived in front of him, Harden Barter felt that something was wrong. With a face full of anger, he yelled at Tushi and Zhengzhou who were standing at the 2 sides. Yes. The 2 generals seemed to have just woken up. They replied loudly and prepared to leave. Wait. Harden Barter's yell caused the 2 to involuntarily stop. What did Daiqin just say? He said that the 5-star army disguised themselves as Kazakh cavalry and already infiltrated the city? Doesn't this mean that the city is no longer safe? You 2 don't need to chase anymore. This king will give you the Tiger Troop talisman. Immediately dispatch the troops and kill all the Kazakh cavalry that just entered the city. Hurry. As he spoke, Harden Barter reached into his pocket and took out 2 Tiger Troop talismans. He gave them to Tushi and Zhengzhou. The 2 generals bowed and quickly left after receiving the Tiger Troop talismans. However, at this moment, Harden Barter, who was extremely angry, didn't think too much about it. Even if Daiqin could betray him, were these 2 generals really that trustworthy? Were they really that loyal? Battle cries rang out from the palace. The 5-star army soldiers who were already prepared outside the palace seemed to have heard a signal. They all shouted loudly, and then rushed over with swords and spears. They quickly opened the palace gates and received Lei Chuandang and the others. At this time, the Turpan soldiers who received the news gathered more and more troops to protect their king. Retreat from here first and regroup with the army at the south gate. We will make a decision then. After Lei Chuandang met up with the soldiers, he immediately gave the order. The group of people quickly left this place. Right after they left, Tushi and Zhengzhou each brought a group of soldiers and appeared here. However, they didn't have the intention to chase after Daiqin. Instead, they split up and went towards the east and west barracks. Tushi really went to mobilize troops. He was once a defeated general and Harden Barter didn't abandon him. Naturally, he was very loyal and wanted to show off. However, the other general, Zhengzhou, didn't think so. It wasn't that he wasn't loyal enough. On the contrary, he was very loyal. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been chosen by Daiqin and promoted. Yes, Zhengzhou was the one who was promoted by General Daiqin. It was because of this that he was greatly affected by what happened in the palace just now. According to his understanding, his benefactor, Daiqin, was a reasonable person and a person who loved his soldiers. Since even he thought that he would lose this battle, he had no choice but to think about the future. Everyone was afraid of death, not to mention a meaningless death. Zhengzhou was also afraid of death. However, if it was on the battlefield and his skills were inferior, he would die without regrets. However, if he were to die in such a muddle-headed manner, and even be scolded after his death, such a death was not something he wanted to see. Gejiner's footsteps became slower and slower as he walked towards the east camp. After hurriedly passing through 2 more streets, he suddenly stopped and looked at his most trusted bodyguard beside him and asked, Are you afraid of death?" The soldier was stunned by this question. After a moment of hesitation, he immediately shook his head. "General, I'm not afraid of death." "Good, then I'll give you a mission. Go quickly." Lei Chuandang and his group had already retreated to the south gate under the protection of the 5-star army cavalry. There were soldiers of the new army everywhere. Retreating here also meant that they were safe. Suhi saw how embarrassed they were and knew that persuasion wouldn't work. He shook his head and said, "It seems that your mission has failed. Since it's like this, then we can only fight. General Daiqin, this time you have nothing to say." Daiqin's face was red. He wanted to say something, but the matter of persuading the king had already failed. In order to protect him, he had also lost dozens of 5-star army brothers. At this moment, he really didn't know what to say. Sometimes silence was a kind of silent agreement. General Suhi nodded. "Good, since it's like this, immediately use the radio to contact the 4th Army Regiment outside the North Gate. Tell them to prepare to bombard the gate and kill our way into the city. When the time comes, we'll kill our way to the north and south." "Yes, sir." After hearing Suhi's order, the soldiers immediately responded loudly and turned to leave the tent. At this moment, the tent flap opened and a messenger walked in. He looked at Suhi and saluted, then said loudly, "General, there's a Turpan soldier outside the tent. He says he's Zhengzhou's soldier and has important matters to discuss with General Daiqin." "Zhengzhou's soldier? Why don't you let him in?" Daiqin said as he looked at Suhi with a pleading expression. Suhi also wanted to see what this person wanted. He nodded and said, "Okay, let him in." Soon, under the guidance of the messenger, a soldier wearing a Turpan uniform walked into the tent. He first looked around and after seeing General Daiqin he knelt down and said, "General, our general invites you to his camp. He says he has important matters to discuss." Chapter 1303. Daiqin had some impression of the soldier in front of him, and confirmed that he was someone who always followed beside Zhengzhou. After confirming his identity and knowing that he wanted to meet him, Daiqin quickly made a decision. He had already made his intentions very clear in the main hall just now, and Zhengzhou was also present at that time. He already knew of his opinion, and now he still wanted to meet him. What was the meaning of this? Could it be that he agreed with his opinion? Did he call me over this time just to discuss something related to this matter? In just a few breaths of time, Daichin thought of many things and decided to take the risk. But just as he was about to nod his head, Suhi had already answered for him. No, General, Daichin won't go. Who knows if your general is trying to trick us? Right, you can't go. It's too dangerous. Suhi's words attracted everyone's agreement. This wasn't to say that everyone was trying to curry favor with him because of his high position, but this was what everyone truly thought. No, I should go. Just when everyone was disagreeing, Daichin opened his mouth with a determined look on his face. As if he was afraid that others would misunderstand or disagree, Daichin explained. This General Zhengzhou is different from the others. He was personally promoted by me and I know his personality well. He definitely wouldn't do something despicable, like lying to others. I think he wants to join us and called me over to discuss something important. Now that I'm no longer around, the military authority of the East and West armies will definitely be given to these people. This is an army of tens of thousands. In order for these people to join the 5-star army, I think this risk is worth taking. Daichin looked at Suhi as he spoke, his expression unwavering. Since he had already decided to stop the war and give more soldiers and civilians a way out, then he had to finish the good deed. Even if he had to die, he wouldn't hesitate. Since he had already taken the risk, Suhi originally didn't want to agree. After all, Daichin was still of great use. There were 300,000 civilians and 100,000 soldiers in Farakashi City. It was impossible to kill them all. In the end, to pacify these people, the local general had to do the work. No matter if it was in terms of experience or influence, Daichin was the best choice to settle these problems. Once something happened to him, a lot of things would be difficult to do. This was also why Yang Chendong ordered the CIA to spend a lot of effort to control Daichin's family. From the looks of it, the effect was excellent. Not only was this person worried about the safety of his family, but he was also worried about the safety of the soldiers and civilians in the city. That was why he agreed to work for him. At this time, if something were to happen, wouldn't all their previous work be for nothing? At the same time, Suhi knew that Daichin's words made sense. If Zhengzhou really wanted to surrender, it would be a pity to give up this opportunity. This meant that not only would they not have the cooperation of tens of thousands of soldiers, they would also have to face tens of thousands more enemies. The difference between the two was too great. Suhi was a bit hesitant, but Daichin said firmly, Commander Su, please give me a chance. Based on my understanding of Zhengzhou, even if he doesn't choose to surrender, he won't threaten my safety. Please believe me. Then okay. Tell everyone to leave. I have something to tell you in private. Suhi finally agreed. Even if she agreed, if Zhengzhou also chose to surrender, she would have to give him some benefits and guarantees. This kind of thing was not suitable to be discussed in public. Instead, it needed to be discussed in private. After about 15 minutes, Daichin walked out of the tent and left with the soldier. When he left, he only brought 4 bodyguards with him to protect his own safety. Because if the opponent had any bad intentions, it would be useless no matter how many soldiers he brought. Commander, what should we do? Seeing Daichin leave, Lei Chuandang and the rest came to Suhi to ask for instructions. Let's wait for a while. Oh right, immediately send a message to the 1st Regiment of the 4th Division to not fire the cannons on the city gate. Wait for our news. Suhi decided to believe in Daichin this time. Maybe he would bring back some good news. Even if things didn't work out, they had already entered the city and couldn't be kicked out. At most, they would just kill a few people. After Daichin followed the soldier to the east camp, he saw Zhengzhou waiting for him at the entrance. When he saw that Daichin not only came, but also only brought 4 soldiers with him, Zhengzhou's face revealed a trace of joy. When they came in front of him, he took the initiative to bow. Subordinate greets General. From Zhengzhou's greeting, one could see his attitude. To this, Daichin also said emotionally, General, please rise. Thank you, General. Zhengzhou immediately stood up and said sincerely, General, please come into the tent for a chat. Okay, lead the way. Daichin's body had already relaxed. If it was a blessing, it wouldn't be a disaster. If it was a disaster, it couldn't be avoided. Very quickly, the two of them entered the tent. When there were only the two of them in the tent, Zhengzhou knelt on the ground. General, I didn't think that you would really come, and only bring 4 soldiers with you. Your trust in me makes me feel ashamed and touched. Quickly get up. Speaking of which, I was the one who promoted you. I think I know you well. Speak, this time you brought me here. Do you have something to say? At this moment, Daiqin had already made up his mind. If the other party really wanted to harm him, there was no need for him to kneel now. Daiqin went straight to the point. Zhengzhou, who got up, didn't say anything. It was obvious that he was still thinking about how to start. After waiting for a while, Zhengzhou still didn't speak. Daiqin knew that he had to say something to increase the stakes. He said, "Okay, if you have something to say, then say it quickly. To be honest, the 5-star army didn't agree to you coming here. If you don't go back for a long time, I'm afraid that something will happen. At that time, it will be very bad for you." Zhengzhou, who was still hesitating, didn't dare to hesitate anymore. He opened his mouth and said, "General, did the 5-star army really enter the city?" Finally, they came to the main topic. Daiqin didn't hide anything and said, "That's right. They destroyed the 100,000 Kazakh cavalry and disguised themselves as them to enter the city. Now they have already taken over the south gate. We can't beat them away." What? The 100,000 Kazakh army was defeated? It was the first time he heard this news. After hearing it, Zhengzhou's face changed. Speaking of which, the 100,000 reinforcements were the hope of Torpon turning the situation around. He didn't think that even this hope would be destroyed. It seemed that he didn't have any other choice. Yes, I've already seen General Kelly. Think about it. Even he has become a captive of the 5-star army. The fate of the 100,000 reinforcements can be imagined. Daiqin nodded his head heavily, giving a clear answer on this point. After knowing the truth, Zhengzhou knew that the situation had changed. He was even more glad for his decision. Of course, he was also grateful to Daiqin. He originally thought that if he sent out an invitation, Daiqin wouldn't dare to come. If that was the case, then he didn't have any other choice. The only thing he could do was to listen to the king's orders and send out troops. But now, since Daiqin came, he obviously had another choice. "General, what do you think I should do next?" Although his question was a little vague, his words already expressed his thoughts. Daiqin was relieved after hearing it. "Zhengzhou, I've already reported your situation to the new army commander of the 5-star army. He arranged it like this." At this moment, Tushi was mobilizing troops in the west camp. Holding the military seal given by King Hardenbarter, he now had control over 70,000 troops. Originally, he had an army of 160,000. Other than the 5,000 outside the north and south gates, 10,000 inside the city, and 70,000 in the east camp, the 70,000 in his hands were the most important. When he thought about having such an important military power, General Tushi was very happy. He thought that his chance to show off had come. The opportunity to lose the Battle of Ayla Mountain Pass would also appear. But what he didn't expect was that this happiness didn't last for too long. It was interrupted when a scout entered the tent and reported, "General, the latest news. Zhengzhou surrendered to the 5-star army and sent people to open the north gate. Right now, the 5-star army outside the north gate has already entered the city. A portion of the cavalry is already charging towards our west camp." The scout knelt on the ground and reported anxiously. General Tushi, who was originally happy and wanted to make a big contribution, heard the news and his expression changed greatly. Zhengzhou's surrender was tantamount to completely overturning the balance of strength on the battlefield, making it difficult for him to see any hope of victory. Now in Firlai City, the enemy had occupied 3 of the 4 cities. Only his west gate was still in his hands. He absolutely couldn't lose it. He couldn't afford to lose it. Like this, let the soldiers withdraw their forces and guard the gate. Don't worry about other places. If anyone wants to approach the west gate, just shoot them with bows and arrows. Also, immediately mobilize a group of troops. I'm going to the palace to pick up His Majesty and leave here immediately." After quickly making a decision, Tushi took a group of 2,000 elite cavalry and went straight to the palace from the west gate. he found King Hardenbarter, who was still sitting there and waiting for news. Time was of the essence. After Tushi saw King Harden, he knelt on the ground and gave a brief introduction of the situation. Then he said loudly, "Your Majesty, Firlice City is no longer safe. For your Majesty's safety, please follow me out of the city to take refuge." Chapter 1304. Jengel had also rebelled. This result struck Hardenbarter like a bolt of lightning. His face was as black as the bottom of a pot. The feeling of being betrayed by his friends and family made him feel like a ball of fire was burning in his heart, and he wanted to vent it. Damn it, they all deserve to die. This king has treated them well. Why did they betray me? General Tushi, why do you think this happened? Hardenbarter, who seemed to be a little neurotic, shouted for a long time. If it was any other time, in the face of the king's anger, Tushi could only kneel at the side and endure. But now, time waits for no one. He could tolerate the king's actions, but his enemies wouldn't. If he waited any longer, once the encirclement was completed, it would be impossible for him to escape. Tushi, who was kneeling on the ground, gritted his teeth and finally did something that shouldn't be done by a subject, but it was the most appropriate action. Come, lift His Majesty up and invite His Majesty out of the palace. This order made the cavalrymen who came with Tushi look at each other. They didn't dare to make any excessive moves in front of the crazy king. Instead, the palace guards approved of this order. They quickly rushed forward and lifted Hardenbarter up and rushed out of the palace. Leaving with them were the concubines of the imperial harem, as well as several young princes and princesses. Half an hour after Tushi left, Commander He led a large number of cavalrymen to the temporary palace. But at this time, the palace was empty and the king was nowhere to be seen. After a careful search, other than some palace maids who were kneeling and trembling in fear, there wasn't a single member of the royal family. General Daichin shook his head regretfully. It seems that His Majesty has left first. Left? Suhi shook his head and said in a very certain tone. They can't run away. Come, immediately interrogate these palace maids and ask them who took Hardenbarter away. Faced with the fierce-looking, burly and murderous new Third Army cavalry, the palace maids naturally answered all the questions. Soon they told the story of Tushi's appearance here and taking the king away. This was within Suhi's expectations. When he heard that the king left, but because he left in a hurry, he left all his belongings in the palace. He called the commander of the 2nd Cavalry Division, Bai Kai, and told him to send a large number of troops to guard the palace. He also reported this matter to Yang Chendong outside the city. Then he said to the commander of the 3rd Cavalry Division, Lei Chuandang, immediately lead the army to attack the west gate. It's best if we can capture Hardenbarter, but if we can't, we have to drive them out of the city. When they get out of the city, there will naturally be people to stop them. In this way, Changbo of the 4th Cavalry Division attacked from the south gate, Lei Chuandang attacked from the palace to the west gate, Jenger's surrendered troops attacked from the east gate, and the 1st Regiment of the 4th Cavalry Division and the Far Eastern Army Cavalry Division attacked from the north gate. At this point, apart from the west gate, most of the city was occupied by the 5-Star Army. At the west gate, Tushi forcefully took Hardenbarter back to the barracks. At this time, the young king's emotions had also gradually calmed down. Although he still had some doubts in his heart, now was not the time to think about these things. What he had to do next was the most important thing. General Tushi, what do you plan to do next? After gradually calming down, Hardenbarter looked at Tushi, who was the last important official by his side, and asked with a hopeful expression, Your Majesty, I have 2 suggestions. The first is to stay in the city and use Your Majesty's name to fuse with the army to resist. We should strive to regain the command of the city and drive the 5-Star Army out of the city. However, this is not easy to accomplish. The second is to immediately leave the city. Where there is life, there is hope. As long as Your Majesty is still here, you can shake your arm at any time and rebuild the mountains and rivers. As for where we should go, Your Majesty, please make the final decision. Tushi cupped his fist and said carefully, the first suggestion was definitely a good one. Once the 5-Star Army was chased out of the city, It would be equivalent to resolving a crisis. With the 300,000 citizens in the city, perhaps they would be able to use them to form an army with a decent number of soldiers. However, it was obvious that with Daichin and Genjul's betrayal, and the 5-star army's cavalry entering the city, it would be quite difficult to do this. If they did not do it well, they would be trapped here. And from the looks of it, this possibility was very high. Although the second suggestion was to give up a large number of civilians and even soldiers, if they wanted to break out, they couldn't bring too many soldiers. Firstly, they needed to leave people to guard the west gate. Secondly, if they had too many people, they would be a big target. The chances of them being discovered and caught would also be very high. In this way, it was equivalent to giving up too many things, which made one's heart ache. However, by doing this, they would be able to stay away from danger, and the chances of them rising would also be very high. After a moment of hesitation, Hardenbarter was worthy of being an ambitious king. He quickly made the decision to leave the city like a gecko cutting off its tail. Let's leave the city. Just like the general said, where there is life, there is hope. How about this, you go and make the arrangements. We don't need to bring too many cavalrymen, only 5,000 elite cavalrymen will be enough. You also arrange for the other 3 groups of 2,000 cavalrymen to go out of the west gate with us. After that, we will go our separate ways to confuse the 5-star army's cavalrymen. Good, your majesty is wise. I will go and make the preparations. Tushi sighed at Hardenbarter's cleverness and immediately flattered him. Then he went to make the preparations. This plan involved selecting soldiers and convincing some generals to stay here. The workload wasn't small. Tushi busied himself for a while, and only managed to settle the matter after half an hour. When there were still some details to be completed, a piece of news came which made Tushi unable to sit still. He left the unfinished work and brought the selected 11,000 cavalrymen to Hardenbarter. Your Majesty, there's news from the periphery. A group of cavalrymen from the 5-star army has arrived at the western gate of the city. They're charging towards us right now. We need to leave immediately. Good, is everything done? Hardenbarter naturally knew that there was no time to lose. This time, he didn't go crazy and didn't ask pretentiously. Everything is done. Among the 11,000 cavalry, we will leave 5,000 of the most elite cavalry to protect your majesty. The remaining 6,000 cavalry will be divided into 3 groups to confuse the enemy. Tushi answered very happily. That's great. Let's go. General Tushi, this king didn't misjudge you. Once this king returns here in the future, there will be many benefits for you. At that time, your entire family will be proud of your choice today. At this moment, Hardenbarter, who could only rely on Tushi, immediately made a heavy promise. In response, a look of excitement flashed across Tushi's face. He knelt down and said, "The Tushi clan is willing to go through fire and water for your majesty's safety. We are willing to risk our lives for the re-emergence of Tulyafin." Haha. Good, we will leave immediately. Hardenbarter laughed heartily. Although there were too many unexpected things this time, no matter what, as long as he could escape, there would be new hope. In this way, the rise of East Mountain wasn't impossible. At that time, he would retaliate against anyone who betrayed him by 10 times or even 100 times. He would let everyone know the consequences of offending him, Hardenbarter. The 11,000 cavalry quickly left the west gate under Tushi's arrangement. When this news reached the ears of the Torpon generals who were arranged to stay behind, many of them couldn't help but curse. After all, even the king and the general had left. They had become rootless trees. Facing the 5-star army coming from all directions, they would only die if they continued to resist. There were also some generals who had a contemplative look after hearing this news. As the saying goes, every man for himself, and the devil takes the hindmost. Even the king and the general had left. They also needed to plan and consider their future. Was it really a wise choice to lead their troops to resist the 5-star army? Tushi couldn't care less about the considerations of these generals. He led 5,000 cavalrymen to protect Hardenbarter, the royal family, and the core members of his family, and quickly left the city. He then waved his hand, and the other 3 groups of 2,000 cavalrymen, each left in different directions. At this point, No one knew which direction was safer. The so-called choice was just to resign themselves to fate. However, compared to the other soldiers who stayed in the city to fend off the 5-star army, it was clear that their chances of survival were higher. Looking at the 3 groups of 6,000 cavalry leaving in different directions, Tushi let out a long sigh and loudly issued the order to set off. They followed the previously planned route and went straight to Boston Lake in the west. As long as they could go around the lake, they would be able to enter the vast Kuruktag mountain range. Once they entered, they would be like birds flying in the sky. It would be difficult to find them. After Suhi's telegram was sent to Yang Chendong, he immediately ordered the light cavalry regiment of the 5-star army and the reconnaissance regiment, who were about to enter through the north gate, to go around the west gate and intercept Harden Barter, who might escape through this route. Not only that, Yang Chendong, who was supposed to enter the city, also led 2,000 black cavalry from the south gate to the west gate and joined in the pursuit and interception of Harden Barter's escape. Beta Persei was somewhat worried about Yang Chendong's decision. They only had 2,000 black cavalry. They didn't know how many cavalry were protecting Harden Barter. If the other party had too many people, would they be surrounded? Chapter 1305. Beta Persei couldn't help but say to Yang Chendong, "Young master, we only have 2,000 cavalry. You can't get involved so easily." "Why? Don't you have confidence in the combat effectiveness of the black cavalry?" Yang Chendong looked sideways at Beta Persei. When he said this, he did not avoid it at all. Instead, his tone was a little heavier so that the black cavalry around him could hear it very clearly. At that moment, after the voice was heard, the black cavalry stared at Beta Persei with an unfriendly look. As Yang Chendong's personal guards, the black cavalry was an extremely arrogant existence. How could such an army tolerate being looked down upon and looked down upon by others? Even if the person who said this was Beta Persei, it still made them very angry. Being stared at like this made Yang Air feel like he was being cut by 1,000 blades. He bitterly smiled and said, "Young master, I don't dare to have such thoughts. I just think that for safety reasons, we can transfer some cavalry to complete this mission with us. For example, the 5th Regiment of the 1st Cavalry Division that hasn't entered the city yet. After all, one more person means one more force." With such an explanation, the murderous gazes became less fierce. Beta Persei could not help but wipe the cold sweat off his forehead. Just now, the momentum and pressure were so great that he almost couldn't bear it. Yang Chendong naturally understood Beta Persei and knew that this was also for his own safety. He thought that only transferring the 5th Regiment would not affect the overall situation and would not have any impact on cleaning up the city, so he nodded and agreed. "Well, go and arrange for Wang Shan to report. Black cavalry, let's go. Let's go." The black cavalry shouted excitedly. After all, there was going to be a war soon. And those were all military merits. How could they not be excited? Just like that, when Harden Barter sent out 3 feints to help him escape, Yang Chendong also arranged for 3 cavalry regiments to pursue. As for whether they could catch up or not, that would depend on luck. In the end, it was clear that Harden Barter's luck was not good. After receiving the order, the scouting group, the light cavalry group, and the 5th World Cavalry Regiment found the 3 faint armies outside the west side of the city, a total of 6,000 cavalry. They easily killed over 1,000 people and learned that Harden Barter had escaped with 5,000 cavalry. They reported this to Yang Chendong. The black cavalry's equipment was too heavy. In terms of speed, they were far slower than the other 3 cavalry units. That was why Yang Chendong had received this information before he even reached the battlefield. Afterward, he asked someone to bring him a map. After observing it for a while, his eyes fell on Boston Lake. In his opinion, if he was Harden Barter, he would definitely choose to go around the lake. This was the best route. "Come on, change direction. Don't go to the west gate, go to the lake. At the same time, send out cavalry scouts to expand the search area." At this moment, Harden Barter naturally didn't know that the 3 cavalry units he sent out had been taken down. He didn't have a transcendental communication device like a radio station in his hands. Right now he was still walking around in the dark. It wasn't exactly casual. They still had a goal, and that was to go around Boston Lake. It was just that this lake was not small. They had already walked for more than 3 hours, but they were only halfway there. This was also because there were too many people holding them back. For example, the concubines of the royal family. They were women and weren't good at riding horses. At this moment, they were sitting in several carriages. Because of their presence, the speed of the team naturally slowed down. In this regard, Tushi was naturally anxious in his heart, but he didn't dare to say anything disrespectful. Not only were there concubines in the carriages, but there were also 3 little princes and 2 little princesses. They were existences that he couldn't afford to offend. The team walked like this, neither fast nor slow. But it seemed that good people were blessed by the heavens. They didn't encounter any enemies along the way. Seeing that the sky was already dark, they had already completed 4/5 of their goal of going around Boston Lake. It seemed that victory was in front of them. General Tushi, it's getting late. Should we find a place to rest? After all, we have been on the road for more than half a day. Everyone is a little tired. Hardenbarter, who insisted on riding on the horse and didn't sit in the carriage, asked with a face full of sweat. After all, he was a king. Staying in the palace every day and neglecting his training, he suddenly rushed for a few hours. Now he could only feel a tearing pain in the muscles of his legs. If it was not for the face of the king, he would have crawled into the carriage to enjoy the massage and care of the concubines. Naturally, Tushi had already seen Hardenbarter's performance on the horse. He had thought more than once about whether he should remind the king to get into the carriage to rest. However, considering that this might embarrass the king, it would not look good on his face, so he endured it. Now that he heard the king's words, he knew that the other party really couldn't endure it anymore. Considering that they didn't see the cavalry of the 5-star army chasing after them, there shouldn't be any problems. Tushi nodded and agreed. Okay, then we will stop and rest. Your Majesty, you also know that we haven't completely escaped to a safe place yet. Hardenbarter just wanted to rest. As for when they would set off, he didn't care. This was because he had already made up his mind. This time he wouldn't come out of the carriage. He nodded and said, "Okay, I will listen to the general." Just like this, before they completely escaped from the dangerous area, the group stopped. This action also destroyed Hardenbarter's last hope and possibility of escaping. At this moment, Yang Chendong's 2,000 black cavalry were walking in a valley 30 li away. The cavalry outpost he sent was less than 10 li away from Hardenbarter. Even if that was the case, it would be extremely difficult to discover the other party in the pitch-black night. However, as the ruler of a country, Hardenbarter was not used to eating dry food, and insisted on making a fire to eat hot food. As a result, the bonfire was dazzling and bright in the dark night. It was because of the fire that the outpost of the black cavalry discovered them. They quickly sent someone to report to the main force behind. "There's a bonfire in a carriage?" Yang Chendong's eyes lit up when he heard the news from the outpost of the black cavalry. Although it wasn't very accurate, it still made him excited. If it was just an ordinary cavalry, there shouldn't be a carriage accompanying them. Since it appeared, it was very likely that it was their target. Considering that Hardenbarter had sent a total of 3 feints, and they had all fallen into his hands, the last remaining cavalry was very likely the final target. "Young master, this new discovery is very likely our target." Beta Persei's reaction wasn't slow. He thought for a while and smiled. "Yes, the possibility is very high. But whether it is or not, since we have encountered them, they can't escape. Pass down the order. 500 people in a group and surround them from all sides." Yang Chendong also smiled and gave the order. At that moment, First Captain Xiuvi was in a group, Second Captain Dao Xiao was in a group, Beta Persei was in a group, and Yang Chendong was in a group with Deputy Captain Ba Dao Jiang in a group. The 2,000 black cavalry split into 4 groups and headed straight for the lakeside, forming an encirclement that wrapped around Hardenbarter's end. The 2,000 well-trained black cavalry were not very fast. Since their target had stopped moving, they had too much time to surround him. Because they weren't fast, they didn't make the slightest sound when they moved. After a few hours, a red light appeared on the horizon. When the sky was about to brighten, They had completely surrounded Hardenbarter. When the sky was about to brighten, General Tushi walked out of the barracks in a suit of armor. Then there were continuous shouts. The 5,000 black cavalry got up one after another and began to prepare breakfast before leaving. But at this moment, a sentry on the periphery ran over in a panic and knelt in front of Tushi. General, something bad has happened. Something bad has happened. Why are you so panicked? Tushi's heart skipped a beat. For some reason, his heart began to beat faster, but in order to stabilize the morale of the army, he didn't show the slightest abnormality on his face. Although this calmness was concealed very well, it was soon completely destroyed by the sentry's next sentence. General, we have been surrounded. There are cavalry outside, all cavalry. What? What did you say? Where did the cavalry come from? At this time, Tushi couldn't care less about the image of a general. He stretched out his arm and grabbed the sentry's neck. There was a trace of trembling in his voice. General, this subordinate doesn't dare to lie to you. There are cavalry outside, and they are cavalry covered in black armor. They only reveal their eyes. They look very frightening, very frightening. The sentry's face was already pale with fright. He stammered, but in the end he recounted the situation he knew. Covered in black armor, could it be the black cavalry? General Tushi, who was more knowledgeable than ordinary soldiers, trembled when he heard this. Then there was an unconcealable fear in his eyes. If what the sentry said was true, then it would be difficult for them to escape this time even if they had wings. It was the black cavalry, the legendary strongest existence of the 5-star army. Their armor was impenetrable, and their blades were invincible. Every target targeted by them would be like being targeted by a pack of wolves. In the end, they would be torn apart without leaving behind any residue. When he thought of these terrifying consequences, although the weather was still very cold at dawn, Tushi's body was already covered in layers of hot sweat. Moreover, the sweat involuntarily dripped down from his forehead. Chapter 1306. What happened in the camp also alarmed Hardenbarter, who was still resting in the carriage. He sent a guard to ask what happened. Tushi came to the carriage with a pale face and reported through the curtain. Your Majesty, something bad has happened. We have been discovered and surrounded. It seems to be Bugnam of Gojoseon's black cavalry. What? Surrounded? Black cavalry? Hardenbarter's voice was trembling when he said these words. Obviously, he was also frightened by this news. At this time he began to regret. If he knew this would happen, he would have thought of a way to escape last night no matter how tired he was. But now it was too late to say anything. Thinking that once they were caught by the 5-star army, they would suffer a fate worse than death. Hardenbarter grabbed the Tushi general's arm as if he was grasping at a life-saving straw. Can we break out of the encirclement? Tushi wanted to say that it was impossible. This time, they were facing the black cavalry, the most powerful existence in the 5-star army. But after seeing Hardenbarter's hopeful eyes, he endured and didn't say the worst result. Instead, he swallowed his saliva and said, "No matter what, this minister will do his best." Good. Hardenbarter didn't know that Tushi was being perfunctory. He said with some excitement, "Then I will leave everything to General Tushi. Don't worry. As long as this king can break out of the encirclement, I will take good care of your family." This was to let Tushi stay behind to cover the retreat. This also showed Hardenbarter's selfish side. In his eyes, his own safety was always the most important. As for others, they could be sacrificed at any time. If the king wanted the minister to die, the minister had no choice but to die. Tushi had no other choice but to nod heavily. Your Majesty, please rest assured. This minister will do his best to delay them. The next step was simple. Tushi led 3,000 cavalry to fight against 2,000 black cavalry. Under the protection of the remaining 2,000 cavalry, Hardenbarter led a group of royal family members to break out of the encirclement, trying to kill their way out. As long as Hardenbarter didn't die, the Turpan kingdom wouldn't be considered dead. There was still hope. The Black Knight Dragon Guards that were slowly approaching from the periphery did not immediately launch an attack. It was as if they were playing a game of eagle catching chicks, constantly shrinking the encirclement. The black cavalry was fully clad in black armor. Even their war horses were covered in black armor. Only their eyes were exposed. They gave off a very eerie and terrifying feeling. The sky was already bright, and when their line of sight wasn't obstructed, the appearance of the invincible black army was a great deterrent to the Turkoman cavalry. Before the battle even began, many of the Turkmen cavalry were already worried. Would they be a match for the black cavalry? The Tushi general also felt a chill in his heart, and did not have the slightest bit of confidence. However, this was his duty. Even if he knew that he would die, he still had to give it a try. Everyone get ready to charge. The enemy only has 1,000 cavalry. They don't have as many people as we do. Kill. The Tushi general felt that the morale of the army had been affected. He didn't dare to wait any longer. Otherwise, who knew how many people would dare to charge? He only hoped that with the advantage of numbers, he could delay the 5-star army. In this way, he could find an opportunity for the king to break out of the encirclement. Raise your guns. Just as the 3,000 Turkmen cavalry received the order to attack the 5-star army cavalry 2 miles away, Beta Persei, Xiuvi, Dao Xiao, and Ba Dao Jiang, the 4 captains, simultaneously issued the order to counterattack. Then, in the hands of the black cavalry, each of them took out a black Type 95 submachine gun. With the continuous development, especially under the guidance of Yang Qindong, and after taking out a large number of related books, the ammunition lathe in the arsenal of Crimson City was finally completed. Although the output was not very high due to various reasons, it could already produce 10,000 bullets a day, and with the completion of another lathe, this number would continue to increase. Yang Qindong also didn't need to rely on the ammunition box in the warehouse like before. He also didn't need to worry about whether the manually made bullets were qualified or not. Without any worries, the black cavalry was the first to be issued the Type 95 submachine gun. Moreover, each soldier usually carried 5 submachine guns, which was a total of 150 bullets. In addition, their whole body was protected by iron armor. It could be said that they were invincible in both offense and defense. Only the 3,000 Turkmen cavalry were already scared out of their wits. They didn't have the slightest hint of fear. With the order to raise the guns, the muzzles immediately spat out tongues of fire towards the charging Turkmen cavalry. It was only a distance of 2 li. To the cavalry, it would only take a few seconds to cover the distance. However, these few seconds were like the difference between heaven and hell. The moment the gunshots rang out, the fate of the Turkmen cavalry was decided. Bam bam bam, bam bam bam. After the rapid fire switch was turned on, they didn't even need to aim. They only needed to fire continuously, and more Turkmen cavalry fell in their charge. This was simply a battle of attrition. No, it should be said that this was a massacre. Under the clash of cold weapons and high-grade firearms, the 3,000 Turkmen cavalry were like moths to a flame. They fell to the ground, charged again, and fell to the ground again. In just a few seconds, the battlefield beside Boston Lake was covered in blood. The ground was littered with the corpses of the cavalry. Among them was the Tushi general. The general, who still wanted to risk his life, was unfortunately hit by the first batch of bullets. Then, he was devoured by the endless sea of bullets. We surrender. There were still 1,000 Turkmen cavalry. When they saw so many of their comrades fall in the blink of an eye, their hearts finally collapsed. No one wanted to die, let alone die in such a meaningless charge. Immediately, those who were still alive jumped off their war horses, threw down the sabers in their hands, and knelt on the ground. It was a scene of black crows and crows. Yang Qindong, who had been watching this scene like a bystander, shook his head lightly. Everything was within his expectations. He waved his hand lightly and said to the second company leader, Dao Xiao, I'll leave this place to you guys. The rest of you, continue the pursuit. Although they said they were going to continue the pursuit, they only ran for 5 stars and surrounded the Turfan group that was still moving slowly with more than a dozen carriages. When the gunshots rang out, the sound of firecrackers rang out continuously. Hardin Barter, who was sitting in the carriage, knew that it was over. He wasn't naive enough to think that someone would set off firecrackers here to welcome him. If that wasn't the case, then there was only one possibility. The sound just now wasn't firecrackers, but the sound of gunfire. He had long heard that the 5-star army possessed the most powerful firearms. He had also seen the power of the cannons. However, he did not expect that even the firearms were so powerful. Now that he was surrounded again, Harden Barter, who had nowhere to go, finally walked out of the largest carriage. What he saw was a group of 5-star army cavalry in black clothes and black armor. On his side, most of the 2,000 cavalrymen who were protecting them had already dismounted. They threw down their weapons and obediently squatted on the ground. Only less than 200 cavalrymen and 5 palace guards were still standing with swords in their hands. They were dutiful and loyal, but looking at their trembling bodies and arms, it could be seen that they were quite afraid at this moment. 3,000 cavalrymen, they couldn't even hold on for a minute. If they didn't die, they would surrender. How long could they hold on for? The scene in front of him made Harden Barter, who wanted to be tough, lose his confidence. When he saw Yang Chendong in the black cavalry, who was the only one wearing a golden battle robe, Harden Barter suddenly knelt on the ground. Great Bugnam of Gojoseon, I surrender. In the end, Harden Barter chose to surrender. Surrounded on all sides, he had no other choice. The battlefield suddenly became very quiet. Except for the sound of the wind from Boston Lake, no other sounds could be heard. Everyone's eyes fell on Yang Chendong, who was wearing a golden battle robe, waiting for the king's decision. Yang Chendong didn't disappoint everyone. He quickly said, "Surrender? You don't deserve it." Ah. These words were like a heavy hammer that smashed into Harden Barter's heart. At this moment, his face was pale and his eyes were filled with endless fear. Why? Didn't you say that as long as I surrender, I will live? Why? Why? Yang Chendong coldly snorted and said with a cold expression, "Everyone only has one chance. Your father chose to surrender, but because you gave up this chance, hundreds of my generals died because of your fake surrender. Just based on this, you will definitely die. Where is Ba Daojiang?" Subordinate is here. Ba Daojiang, who had been waiting for a long time, shouted and rode out. It was Ba Daojiang who had negotiated with King Shiza. Because of this, hundreds of Mongol soldiers were killed by arrows. Although Yang Chendong didn't mean to blame him for this matter, it had always been a knot in his heart. Now that he finally had a chance to take revenge, how could he let it go? He immediately stared at Harden Barter, who was trembling like a sieve. He thought that as the king of a country, as long as he was willing to surrender, no one would refuse. However, Yang Chendong didn't feel at ease at all. At this moment, Harden Barter, who was shrouded in death, felt his body turn cold. His face was pale as he stammered, "No, you can't kill me. I am the king of Turpan. If you kill me, you will attract the curses and fear of others. This won't be good for your future unification. I have already surrendered. You can't kill me." Chapter 1307. No benefits? This is not something you should worry about. After a cold snort, Yang Chendong said without changing his expression, since he wanted to lead all the Han people to the peak of the world, he was destined to walk on a pile of bones. If he was afraid of rumors, then he might as well not do anything. But since he was going to do it, he had to do it to the best of his ability. He had to make all the enemies feel fear from the bottom of their hearts the moment they heard his name. Only by doing so could he achieve the best results with the least number of casualties. Ba Daojiang, what are you waiting for? Yes. With a loud shout, a fast horse suddenly rushed out of the army and rushed straight towards Harden Barter, who was standing beside the carriage with a pale face. "Protect His Majesty." The 200 most loyal guards shouted and wanted to stop Ba Daojiang, but before they could do anything, another burst of gunfire sounded. The 200 cavalrymen didn't even have time to rush out before they fell off their horses one by one. It was also at this time that Ba Daojiang rushed past them. His sharp saber fell down, and a big head flew up. Harden Barter's eyes were wide open as his head was separated from his body. Even when he died, he didn't think that the 5-star army would really take his life. He was the ruler of a country. As soon as Harden Barter died, the remaining 1,000 or so cavalrymen trembled all over. They didn't know what would happen to them. Beta Persei rode to Yang Chendong's side and asked carefully, "Young master, I'll leave the rest to you," Yang Chendong said with waning interest. Hardenbarter was already dead, so he naturally didn't care about the others. After saying this, under the lead of the 200 Black Knight Dragon Guards, he slowly returned to where he came from. Yes. Beta Persei respectfully sent off Yang Chendong. When his arm fell, he looked back at the Torpon soldiers kneeling on the ground. They were so scared that they didn't know what to do. He slowly said, "If you want to live, kill all the people in the carriage. Otherwise die. As for the other Black Knights and Dragon Guards, after they are done with the development, they will set up an observatory. We must let others know the consequences of going against our 5-star army." This meant that they couldn't let Hardenbarter's family go. Although they were mostly women and children, they were also a scourge. If they stayed, who knows what would happen when the 3 princes grow up? If they didn't remove the roots, they would grow again when the spring breeze. Although this was a bit cruel, for the sake of the overall situation, they had to do it. Of course, the Black Knight Dragon Guards were not interested in doing such dirty work. They did not want to attack unarmed people. Fortunately, with these surrendered soldiers, they could do such a thing. They could also use them as proof of their allegiance to seize the right to live. Hardenbarter was dead, so his family naturally didn't pose any threat. In order to survive, the more than 1,000 cavalrymen pounced on the carriages like a pack of wolves. Then another massacre took place. Yang Chendong, who had already gone far away, had a cold expression on his face. He didn't know if what he was doing was right or wrong. Sometimes he would be soft-hearted. But when he thought about how if it wasn't for his appearance, the Han people would first be enslaved by the Jianghu slaves hundreds of years later and become low-class people like slaves, then they would have to face the invasion of the Western powers, especially the invasion of the Japanese, who knew how many innocent people were killed. In contrast, in order to prevent the Han people from being enslaved and bullied, he was willing to be a villain and a demon king. "Forget it, if I don't go to hell, who will? If there is karma, then come at me," Yang Chendong muttered in his heart as he rode away. Next to Boston Lake, statues were soon erected. Not only were there heads of women and children, but even the head of King Hardenbarter was among them. When the news spread out, it immediately caused an uproar. Countless people were furious and scolded the 5-star army for being too cruel. At the same time, they were also worried about their future. If they didn't surrender, would they have the same ending? After setting up the statues, Beta Persei said to the surviving Torpon cavalrymen, "This is what you did. It has nothing to do with our 5-star army, do you understand? Yes, we killed these people." The captives who survived with great difficulty immediately knelt on the ground and swore. They had already taken that step and had no other choice. Very good. Beta Persei nodded in satisfaction. Although it was more or less a lie, these people really weren't killed by them. This was the truth. Hardenbarter was dead. With the help of Daiqin and Thorgen, the city was quickly breached by the 5-star army and public security began to stabilize. The granaries were opened, and the people could go home. For a time, the people on the streets were grateful to the 5-star army and Bugnam of Gojoseon. To the commoners, whoever allowed them to survive was their benefactor. As for the people who were loyal to the king, in the face of life and death, how many of them could be Wen Tianxiang? The news that Hardenbarter died next to Boston Lake was quickly spread. This was naturally Yang Chendong's idea. He didn't need to hide anything, and since he did it, he wasn't afraid of others talking about it. At the same time, he also wanted to see how Daiqin and Zhenjiao would perform. When the news came, the 2 generals immediately closed their houses and didn't come out. It didn't take long for the 2 resignations to be sent to the military camp of the 5-star army and placed in front of Yang Chendong. "Young master, you don't know what's good for you." Beta Persei's eyes flashed with anger when he saw that Daiqin and Zhenjiao chose to resign from their current positions and would rather be a normal person than work for the 5-star army in Yangxie. In Beta Persei's eyes, it was their fortune that the young master was willing to use them. Now that he publicly refused, he didn't want face. It had to be said that at this moment, in Beta Persei's eyes, Yang Chendong's wishes were the most important. This was because he went from not being able to eat or sleep well to where he was today. And all of this was brought to him by Yang Chendong. He was his benefactor in this life. In comparison, Yang Chendong wasn't angry. Instead, he looked at the two resignations with satisfaction and said, "Not bad. These two are loyal and can be used. How about this? Order all the 5-star army soldiers in the city to retreat to the outer city." Outside Daiqin's house, Yang Chendong had already changed into a green robe. Beside him was the black cavalry. They didn't wear armor, but only ordinary people's clothes. They just stood there like this, waiting for the master of the house to appear. Not long later, the house door opened. Daiqin, with bloodshot eyes, brought a group of servants out and knelt in front of Yang Chendong. It could be seen that Daiqin's expression wasn't good. He knew that the king was dead, and even his family wasn't released. In his eyes, the 5-star army's actions were too cruel. He really couldn't imagine that this was done by the Han people who were taught by Confucianism. What was the difference between this and the Mongolian great Khan Kublai? With such a knot in his heart, Daiqin obviously couldn't risk his life. He was already prepared to hand over all his power and become an ordinary person. But he didn't expect that Bugnam of Gojoseon didn't have the intention to let him go. He actually brought people to his house. Was he going to hide his bow after the birds had flown away? With such doubts, and with the determination to die, Daiqin led a group of people in the mansion to kneel in front of Yang Chendong, putting on a look of absolute determination. Take the people away. With regards to Daiqin's actions, Yang Chendong didn't care at all. His face didn't show any expression. And after saying this sentence, he turned around and left. Very quickly, 2 black cavalry walked up and carried Daiqin, letting him follow in the group. As for his family members who were kneeling on the street, no one cared about them. Daiqin didn't know what they were going to do. He used his expression to suppress the cries and screams of his family members, and just like that, he followed behind Yang Chendong into Foreshire City. Not long later, he saw Gejener also being brought over. He was also alone, and was sent into the group. The two of them walked together, and quickly exchanged glances. After seeing the confusion in each other's eyes, they simply let go of the doubts in their hearts and followed behind Yang Chendong. They wanted to see what kind of tricks Bugnam of Gojoseon was going to play. The outer city was already occupied by the 5-star army, but the soldiers in the inner city had already retreated. The security of the inner city also fell into chaos because of this. Although they didn't know why the 5-star army retreated, but to many people, there was no order and law in the inner city, and this gave some people an opportunity. This was especially true for those who were lazy and gluttonous. They saw an opportunity and hope. A city without order and law, a city without supervision, caused the evilest nature in people's hearts to be exposed. When Yang Chendong and his group entered the inner city, they could see smashing and looting happening everywhere. On the streets, it was common to see people fighting to death and being crippled. A person from a rich family or a merchant became the main target of looting. Some young girls also became the existence of delicious cakes, attracting countless people's attention and looting. After just walking through one street, they saw over a dozen commoners lying on the ground in pools of blood. They saw 2 shops being smashed and burned. They saw 3 women being openly carried on the shoulders of evil men, as they left while laughing loudly. If it wasn't for the fact that Yang Chendong and his group had too many people, and that they were all valiant, their embroidered clothes would have become the target of looting. Chapter 1308. How did this happen? In the group, Daiqin and Genjil's expressions changed greatly. They couldn't believe this scene. When they saw more and more Torpan civilians dying on the streets, their hearts ached and they couldn't believe it. Yang Chendong, who had been waiting for the reaction of the two, finally spoke at this time. Look, this is the true evil in the hearts of humans. This king knows that Hardenbarter's death, including his entire family, was in the hands of the surrendered soldiers. You are angry, even angry. But this king wants to say that they are humans. Are these ordinary citizens not humans? If the two of you are only angry because of the destruction of the Torpan royal family, then this king can let the people kill each other and reveal their ugliest side. This way, It won't be long before this Kali city becomes an empty city. Is this what you, who claim to be good officials for the people, want to see? This question made Daichin and Zhenjiao speechless. They finally understood what Yang Chendong meant. If they didn't submit, then he would let this matter continue to develop. At that time, all the civilians of Turpan would be destroyed because of the internal strife. As Turpan people, as people who had lived here for generations, both Daichin and Zhenjiao didn't want to see such a thing happen. That way, they wouldn't be able to face their ancestors and ancestors after death. But if they submitted to Yang Chendong and worked for him because of this, they were somewhat unwilling. For a long time the two didn't speak. Yang Chendong also didn't have the intention to rush them. There were some things that had to be thought through by others. If he blindly interfered, even if he could be used, it might not be sincere. Since they needed time to think it through, he would give them time. After an unknown period of time, Daichin saw another family being robbed by bandits on the street. An old man was stabbed and fell on the street because he chased after the bandits. Daichin finally couldn't bear it anymore. Wunan King, we have already surrendered. They are already your people. How can you watch them die and not save them? Daichin was angry. This was what Yang Chendong wanted to see. He laughed and said, "Surrendered? Why do I see them returning to their own residences and not caring about the outside world?" He was saying that Daichin and Zhenjiao's actions made him angry. At that moment, Daichin could only speak in a short breath. But we also did our best for the 5-star army to enter Kailassi. No one will deny your contributions and efforts. But what this prince wants is for you to truly submit to me. Yang Chendong's voice suddenly became stern. These civilians weren't true Han people. If someone started it, they would pick up their weapons and become enemies with the 5-star army. Even so, if one more died, he wouldn't feel the slightest bit of heartache. Only those who truly submitted to Yang Xie were his people. Only then would they receive his care and care. Only then would he have the obligation to protect their rights. Yang Chendong wasn't in a hurry, but Daichin and Zhenjiao couldn't do that. If they just stayed in their residences and didn't care about the outside world, maybe they could pretend to be deaf and blind. But since they saw it with their own eyes, they couldn't just ignore it. Bugnam of Gojoseon, we submit. We take back our resignation. We are willing to work for Yang Xie and the 5-star army. Finally, the cruelty of reality forced the two to change their minds. They had to do their best to protect the civilians of Turfan. Yang Chendong was waiting for these words. He stopped in his tracks and turned around to look at Daichin and Zhenjiao. Very good, you made the right choice. Now, I will give you the authority to send soldiers into the city. When the time comes, I will leave behind 10,000 5-star army to help you restore law and order. After that, there will be other non-human civilians coming in. The Turfan civilians here will also leave their homeland and live in other places. But I can guarantee that as long as they sincerely submit, not only will their safety be guaranteed, their future lives will be better than now. Even the descendants of the two generals will thank you for your actions today. Yang Chendong had never been stingy with his help to the civilians who truly submitted to him. When they went to a new place, they would be given enough land to live on and start a new life. At that time, there would be no more war, no more fear. There would only be hope and longing for a limitless life. This point was already felt by the countless people who submitted to Yang Xie. After finally convincing Daichin and Gejener, Yang Chendong handed over the task of reorganizing the Turpan kingdom to the two of them. Based on the principle of using the barbarians to control the barbarians, no one understood the situation here better than them. Naturally, no one could do a better job than them. Although Turfan was destroyed, Yang Chendong's footsteps would not stop. He brought the 5-star army and continued to move deeper into Ili. His target was the entire world. Just like Yang Xie had the Security Bureau and the Central Intelligence Bureau, Baiming also had the Imperial Secret Service and the East Faction Guards. While Yang Chendong was leading the 5-star army to slaughter in all directions in Ili, shaking the prestige of our Han people, information regarding that place was also being sent back to the hands of Marquis Wuching Shiheng. Every time he saw the news of the 5-star army winning another battle, Shiheng's face would turn ugly. If not for the fact that he understood Yang Chendong, he would have doubted the authenticity of the news. The Great Ming Dynasty emphasized culture and suppressed martial arts. The status of martial artists was never high. Actually, it was not only the Great Ming Dynasty that was like this. Ever since An Lushan started a rebellion, the Song Dynasty was like this, and now, the Ming Dynasty was like this as well. Even though the Zhao clan and the Zhu clan started a rebellion through martial arts, this did not stop them from getting rid of the donkey after it had outlived its usefulness. That's right, they got rid of the donkey after it had outlived its usefulness. In order to prevent the same thing from happening to them, the Great Ming Dynasty had many similarities with the Song Dynasty. For example, in order to prevent the martial artists from gaining power, the emperor would work together with the civil officials to suppress them. This resulted in the saying that the emperor and the scholar officials ruled the world together. As a result, the strength of the country would slowly decline, and in the end, it would be replaced by other dynasties. All of this was just to say one thing. Under such a policy, it was difficult for the martial artists to achieve anything. Shi Heng lived in this era, and had seen too many cases of civil officials suppressing the martial artists. Even though he was Wuqinghao, it was still difficult for him to enter the eyes of many people. In their eyes, he was just a martial artist. There were many things that happened from time to time. For example, the provision of provisions was always a little late. It seemed that if they did not do so, it would be difficult to show the importance of the civil officials. At the Wanquan division, the ration officer once again came to Shi Heng to complain about the lack of rations. When he sent people to rush them, they were deliberately making things difficult for them. There were even rumors that they had eaten so much, yet they still hadn't won a single battle, and that they were truly a bunch of trash. Enough. Shi Heng sat in the main hall of the residence with an unhappy expression. Marquis will personally report this matter. The provisions will be sent soon. His eyes weren't very big, but they were somewhat sinister as he fiercely glared at the fodder manager. Then he waved his hand, indicating for him to leave. The warning in that glance was very obvious. It was probably to tell the provision officer that some words could not be said casually. If he dared to disturb the morale of his troops, he would be punished by military law. After receiving the warning, the fodder officer immediately retreated while trembling. Just as he left, an order was sent out to invite General Fang Dingshan to the residence for a discussion. Not long after, General Fang Dingshan, who was dressed in armor and somewhat travel-worn, arrived at the Wuqinghao residence. In the study, he saw Shi Heng waiting for him. "Marquis, you called for me?" When Fang Dingshan saw Shi Heng, he greeted him. Then he found a place to sit and drank the cup of warm tea in front of him. One was a close official of the emperor, while the other was a marquis personally conferred by the emperor. The two of them worked together in the frontier fortress. As time passed, their relationship became much closer. Just from Fang Dingshan's behavior after entering the study, it could be seen. Shi Heng looked at Fang Dingshan with a face full of smiles. He also looked at his casual actions. This person had some ability, especially in the area of training soldiers. Under his leadership, the Liaodong Iron Cavalry's battle strength was constantly increasing. The number of soldiers also increased. It had increased from the previous 70,000 to the current 100,000. Naturally, this was tacitly approved by the emperor. At the same time, it was also fully supported by Shi Heng. After seeing the five-star army's cavalry continue to dominate the world, the importance of cavalry became more and more obvious. Not only did the Liaodong Iron Cavalry increase in numbers, their battle strength was also not bad. Shi Heng went to check on them before. Whether it was their military strength, military discipline, or battle strength, they all shocked him. He had seen with his own eyes a group of 200 Liaodong Iron Cavalry charge into a group of 3,000 infantrymen. When the wooden swords clashed, the wind swept away the clouds and defeated the enemy. With such a strong army, even if they were to face the famous cavalry of the five-star army, they wouldn't be afraid. With this confidence, Shi Heng had called the other party over in the hopes of winning a battle. This way, he wouldn't be underestimated by the civil officials in charge of the provisions behind him. After watching Fang Dingshan drink 2 full bowls of tea, Shi Heng finally opened his mouth. He first repeated what the provisions officer said, then sat down to see Fang Dingshan's reaction. Oh, someone actually said that. They really can open their mouths. The emperor didn't even order us to fight against the 5-star army. They are jumping up and down like monkeys. Fang Dingshan was after all a martial artist, so when he spoke he did not have too many taboos. Chapter 1309. That's right. Shi Heng said empathetically. Those people in Jingdo are already afraid of the powerful Yang Qindong. Especially after the previous defeat, some people are as timid as mice. They keep telling His Majesty not to provoke Bugnam of Gojoseon. They even say that until now, Bugnam of Gojoseon hasn't done anything harmful to the Great Ming. It's really funny when you think about it. They don't make a move because they have too many targets to conquer. They don't have the time to do anything. That's right. Those scholars who only know how to use literature and martial arts are simply harming the country, Fang Dingshan said in agreement. He also didn't agree with these people's words. What Bugnam of Gojoseon still had the Great Ming in his heart, and didn't dare to make a move against the Great Ming. In his eyes, it was nonsense. Yang Qindong didn't make a move now because he didn't think the time was right. Once he did make a move, it would be like the autumn wind sweeping away the fallen leaves. No one would be able to stop him, right? Scholars are harming the country. Shi Heng also let out a long sigh. After seeing Fang Dingshan's anger, he suddenly changed the topic and said, "It's because of this that we can't let this kind of thing happen. We can't just stand by and watch the 5-star army grow. I don't dare to say anything about other places, but at the very least, we can't allow this kind of thing to happen in our territory." Oh, Marquis is preparing to make a move? Fang Dingshan also understood the meaning behind these words, and asked with some excitement. Yes, he's going to make a move. We can't just stand by and watch the 5-star army's provisions walk past Tulu City every day and do nothing, Shi Heng said with a righteous expression. Fang Dingshan first nodded in agreement, but then quickly shook his head. But His Majesty didn't give an order. This order was referring to the order to openly attack the 5-star army. Speaking of which, ever since they failed to attack the beginning city, Baiming had become much more well-behaved. At the very least, they no longer openly became enemies with the 5-star army. In the words of those civil officials, since Bugnam of Gojoseon was so belligerent, then let him fight others. As long as he did not find trouble with Baiming, they would let him do as he pleased. Swords had no eyes on the battlefield. Once they lost a battle and Yang Qindong died on the battlefield, the so-called 5-star army would also collapse. At that time, Baiming would send out troops to suppress them, and they would be able to win the battle. In the end, this was the mentality of an ostrich. Since he couldn't beat them, he placed his hopes on others. Since the 5-star army did not take the initiative to provoke the Baiming army, they did not need to make a move. Everyone could live peacefully for a few days. Naturally, Su Yozhen's contribution was not lacking in this. Yang Qindong needed to conquer the grasslands and the inner regions to increase the 5-star army's influence and territory. If Baiming made a ruckus at this time, it would be very inconvenient. This was why Su Yozhen ordered the Baiming army to not make a move. Now, it seemed that the effect was not bad. At least some civil officials believed it. Baiming's emperor, Zhu Qiyu, also did the same. However, Shi Heng, who had been laughed at for asking for provisions, felt a bit of anger in his heart. He decided to make a move and fight with the 5-star army to find trouble with them. It's fine. It's true that the emperor didn't give any orders, so we don't need to use our own names. We can just pretend to be bandits and remnants of the grasslands. Marquis has already thought about it. We can split up into smaller groups and use small groups to disturb the enemy's supply lines. This way, we won't have to worry about being reprimanded. We can also train our soldiers and steal some provisions for our own use. It's killing 3 birds with 1 stone. The more Shi Heng spoke, the more excited he became. It was as if countless benefits were already waiting for him. At this moment, Fang Dingshan's eyes became brighter and brighter. Disguising themselves as bandits and forces opposing the 5-star army to disturb them was indeed a good move. This way, they wouldn't have to worry about the emperor's reprimand. If they fought more battles, they would be able to accumulate small victories. It was truly wonderful. He was so excited that he immediately stood up and said, "That's great. I'll go arrange it right away." "Good. General Fong, you've worked hard. However, you must remember not to send too many people at once. After all, there aren't many forces opposing the 5-star army in this area," Shi Hung carefully warned. He said this because he had another purpose. That was to send out a small number of cavalry at once. Even if one of the groups failed or were completely wiped out, it wouldn't affect the overall situation of the Liaodong cavalry. Fong Dingshan listened and nodded repeatedly. Then the two discussed for a long time and discussed some specific issues. In the end, when both sides felt that there were no problems, they looked at each other and laughed. Under the protection of more than 100 5-star army soldiers, a group of more than 10 horse carriages escorted the provisions from the first city to the Shajing city. Along with this group, there were also 200 people of different races. There were men and women, old and young. They either brought their families or supported the carriages as they walked. Upon closer inspection, everyone's eyes were filled with yearning for a better future. These 200 people had already obtained identification cards issued by the Logistics Command. With this, they could each receive 10 mu of rations and farming tools according to the number of people they had when they arrived at the new place. They could also be allocated a house and a sum of money that was enough for them to settle down in their new home. The future place would also be their new starting point. As long as they were willing to work hard, with provisions and money, how could their life not be good? Although they had to leave their hometown because of this, compared to living a stable and prosperous life, those were nothing. The 200 people were even chatting and laughing along the way. Although everyone came from different ethnic groups and regions, it was very likely that they would be living together in the future. Thus, they slowly became familiar with each other along the way. For the behavior of the people, the 105-star army soldiers didn't do anything to stop them. The higher-ups had already said that as long as the people were obedient, they would be convenient along the way. After all, the army would still need to rely on these people to provide the provisions needed by the army in the future. It was a bit inappropriate to say that they were the parents of food and clothing, but it was not too much to say that they depended on each other. In this way, the people helped to drive the carriages. When the road was smooth, they would sit in the carriages to rest for a while. From time to time, when they encountered water sources, the soldiers and civilians would stop to fetch water and interact with each other. It was a picture of harmony. However, all of this beauty was suddenly cut short by a series of rumbling sounds that came from the ground. As the captain of the team, Bien Bin, the company commander, pulled out his sword when he heard the rumbling sound. Then he shouted, "Soldiers, prepare for war, people hide beside the carriages." It was no wonder that Bien Bin was so nervous. The area he was walking in was far from the first city and Shajing city, so there would often be bandits in this area. Although relying on the powerful reputation of the 5-star army, ordinary people didn't dare to find trouble with them casually. However, there were still some desperados among them, and there were still some people who were willing to take the risk. With the idea that a villain would not make a big mistake, Bien Bin gathered the soldiers together. Among them, there were 50 soldiers who had war horses. At this time, they were sharpening their swords with the company commander, ready to deal with any unexpected situation. On the other hand, the people didn't seem to be nervous. They were all people who had been conquered by the 5-star army. They had seen the power of the 5-star army, and didn't think that anyone would dare to challenge the authority of the 5-star army. Therefore, even if they heard the rumbling sound of the war horses, there were still some people who looked forward, wanting to see who was so bold, and then watch these people who appeared leave with their tails between their legs. The 5-star flag was fluttering in the breeze, like a command flag standing on the mule carriage. It also proved the identity of this supply team to the outside world. Many times, the appearance of the 5-star flag was like a huge and unstoppable city wall, causing some bandits to forget and retreat. After all, the strength of the 5-star army was too strong. It was so strong that many small tribes who had not yet surrendered did not have any intention to resist. This was also the biggest reliance and confidence in the eyes of the people. Report, a group of 200 Mongolian bandits appeared in front of us. They are rushing towards us quickly. They are less than 5 miles away. The scout cavalry in charge of guarding the front rushed back and shouted loudly as he rushed back. Mongolian bandits? When he heard this name, Bien Bin's face became a little ugly. The so-called Mongolian bandits referred to those small Mongolian groups who were not willing to surrender. They were usually small in number, and their battle strength was not strong. When faced with the 5-star army, they would avoid them. However, when faced with the 5-star army, they would suddenly attack like a mad dog. These bandits could not be killed, and they could not be killed. They were the most troublesome thing to deal with. Who would have thought that he would encounter them here today? Bien Bin felt a headache coming on, and he hurriedly started to get into formation. 50 cavalry soldiers were ready to fight at any time, and 50 infantry soldiers were ready to shoot from afar. Bien Bin wanted to use this method to warn those bandits that he was not someone to be trifled with. He hoped that this method could scare them away, and make them stay away from him, and avoid a possible disaster. Bien Bin was a little nervous, but he did not show it on his face. Instead, he confidently said to his soldiers and the people around the carriage, "Everyone, don't worry. Even if the bandits come, they will not easily make a move. For these carriages of provisions, the price they have to pay is not proportional to the price they will get." Everyone thought that the bandits who came were after the provisions. However, they did not know that this time, it was not the bandits who came, but the valiant Liaodong Iron Cavalry. Baiming had spent a lot of money to build this cavalry. Chapter 13:10. It was only the distance of a 5-star army. For a real cavalry, it would only take half the time it takes to drink a cup of tea to arrive. When both sides could clearly see each other's formation, Bien Bin, as the company commander, took the initiative to move forward and shouted, "We are the new 5-star Army's new army, 1012th Division, 101st Division, 7th Regiment, 2nd Battalion, 5th Company. We were ordered to escort the supplies to the army in front. It's better for you to move aside. Otherwise, if you attract the wrath of the 5-star army, it's not something you can." After revealing his identity, before he could finish his warning, an arrow pierced through the air and hit Bien Bin's chest, where his heart was located. With just one arrow, Bien Bin's shouting stopped abruptly. His body trembled a little, and with an unwilling expression he fell from his horse. Bien Bin was dead. The sudden death of a company commander shocked everyone. The 200 civilians let out a cry of alarm, and started to flee in all directions. Obviously, this scene had exceeded their psychological defenses. They did not expect the bandits to be so arrogant, to actually kill someone without saying a word. Furthermore, the person they killed was a captain of the 5-star army. This was equivalent to drawing a grudge that would not end until one of them was dead. Presumably, once this matter was spread, the headquarters of the 5-star army would definitely not let this matter rest. However, that was all for later. The most important thing now was to survive. Otherwise, they would definitely not be able to witness this scene. The civilians began to run in all directions in panic. However, the soldiers could not run away. They still needed to avenge their company commander. After hesitating for a moment, both the cavalry and the infantry launched their own counterattack. Thus, a small-scale battle began. Unfortunately, the cavalry needed some distance to launch an attack, while the infantry's range was not enough. In just the first clash, the 5-star army suffered a great loss. More than 30 soldiers died on the spot. The 200 cavalry of the bandits did not feel satisfied after the first charge. What they wanted was to kill all of them, and not leave a single one alive. Therefore, they quickly mobilized the horses to charge again. After repeating this process 4 times, there was not a single 5-star army soldier who could breathe beside the carriage. All of their brothers in the company had been killed. Under the surprise attack, only 2 of the Meng bandits' 200 cavalrymen were killed, and only a dozen were injured. Seeing this result, the leading Liaodong cavalry general was very satisfied. He laughed and said, "1 team, stay behind to escort the carriages. 2, chase after the fleeing civilians. Remember, don't leave a single one alive. Don't leave a single one alive." The cavalry of the second group, which had close to 100 men, responded in unison before charging off in all directions. Not long after, cries for help could be heard from afar, but they soon disappeared from the grassland. 100 soldiers and 200 civilians were all dead. Not a single person was left alive. And this was just the beginning. In just 4 days, more than 10 companies and more than 2,000 civilians had been killed, and more than 200 carriages of provisions had been stolen. The news was quickly discovered by the scouts of the 5-Star Army, and they reported back one by one. In the headquarters of the new army, Tiger's man's eyes were burning with anger. Looking at the bad news that came one after another, his face was as gloomy as water. In front of him, the 3 company commanders were also unhappy. They clenched their fists and looked like they wanted to eat someone. Forcefully suppressing the anger in his heart, Tiger's man looked at the 3 commanders and asked, "Tell me what you think." The commander of the 101st Army, Lu Zhua, who had the most experience, was the first to speak. "This is clearly a military operation against our 5-Star Army. Someone is playing with fire. We can't just sit here and wait for death. We must find the culprit and kill one as a warning to the others. Let's establish Jingguan Temple to scare everyone." His voice was filled with murderous intent. Lu Zhua was really angry. More than half of the soldiers that were killed were from the 101st Army. As a commander, how could he not be angry when he saw his soldiers die without knowing who the culprit was? That's right. We must investigate. After we find the culprit, we must exterminate his entire family as a warning to the others. The commander of the 102nd Army, He Chong, also spoke. His aura was not any weaker than Lu Zhua's. On the other hand, the commander of the 103rd Army, Qin Feng, didn't speak immediately. Instead, he lowered his head and thought about something. His silence made Tiger's man look at him. "Commander Qin, what do you think?" Qin Feng only woke up when his name was called. He raised his head and said his opinion. "Commander Tiger, from what I see, this isn't the work of normal bandits. I've asked the scouts who went to investigate the scene. They said that most of our soldiers were killed in one hit. I really can't think of anyone who could do this." As expected of someone who worked in the Ministry of Public Security in Crimson City, he could see the essence of the matter at a glance. Tiger's man nodded in satisfaction. "That's right. What Commander Qin said is right. If it were normal bandits, it would be impossible to kill all of them. Even if our 5-Star Army can't defeat them, at least 10 to 20% of our soldiers should be able to escape. However, none of them escaped. This is enough to prove that our opponent is a powerful and well-organized organization. Normal bandits can't be compared to them." The moment Tiger's man finished speaking, the commander of the 101st Army, Lu Zhua, blurted out, "Does this mean that the Walla army has returned?" The news of Yeshen leading 70,000 Walla army and escaping from the inner district had already been spread back. Yang Chendong had even sent a telegram to remind everyone to be careful of the enemy's sudden attack. After all, he couldn't be sure if Yeshen was really afraid of him or not. Lu Zhua's analysis was reasonable. "It can't be them." Commander Qin Feng directly denied it. "Why?" Lu Zhua asked in confusion. "It's very simple. This isn't the style of the Walla cavalry. If they appeared here, 70,000 of them would have already caused a commotion. Only then would they be able to attract more Walla cavalry to join them. Why would they do something so cowardly? Just for a small amount of food, the sacrifice is not proportional to the gain." Qin Feng said in a very confident tone. Less than 200 carriages of food was really not much use to a 70,000 Walla cavalry. He even had a feeling that the real target of the attacker wasn't the food. It was just something they did along the way. Qin Feng's words made Lu Zhua fall into deep thought. He didn't say anything else. On the other hand, the commander of the 102nd Army, He Chong, suddenly thought of something and said, "If it's not the Wara cavalry, could it be the Baiming army?" It wasn't strange for He Chong to say this. In his opinion, the only powerful army in the area was the Baiming army. But did they have the guts to do so? Qin Feng didn't say anything. Although he thought so, he didn't have any evidence. But when it came to military matters like this, if it wasn't handled well, it could lead to big problems. Think about it. If it wasn't the Biming army who did it, and they really did fight the Biming army, what would the result be? The person who actually did it would probably wake up laughing in his sleep. Investigate. In the end, it was Tiger's man who made the decision. Send more cavalry scouts. If one team isn't enough, then send two. If two teams aren't enough, then send 5 or 10 teams. In short, we have to find them and surround them. We need solid evidence. After the meeting ended, all the cavalry scouts in the new army were sent out. Not only that, Yang Si from the logistics headquarters had also called over the cavalry scout division that was currently in training. This was a cavalry scout division that he was currently training, and the first commander of the scout division was the chief scout instructor Su Yunsheng, whom he had spent a great deal of effort to invite from Crimson City. Su Yunsheng was the first recon company commander and recon battalion commander of the 5-star army. He was also a person who was registered with Yang Qindong. Later on, because of his outstanding strength, he was sent to Resin City to teach the Cold Front soldiers. Over the years, he had taught so many students that even he couldn't remember how many there were. However, he liked the feeling of fighting and killing. This time, Yang Si had spent a lot of effort to invite Yang Si, who had stayed in Resin City, to the logistics headquarters. According to his promise, as long as Su Yunsheng performed well, he would definitely have the opportunity to kill enemies on the battlefield. This time, more than 10 companies of soldiers were killed, 2,000 to 3,000 civilians were slaughtered, and 100 to 200 logistics carriages were stolen. This attracted the anger of the new regiment, and also angered Yang Si. After all, the logistics and rations were under his control. Since someone dared to do this, it meant that they didn't put him in their eyes. Therefore, this time, he invited Su Yunsheng to come out. There was no need to investigate this matter clearly and obtain evidence. Since there was a battle to fight, Su Yunsheng did not decline at all. He quickly gathered the only 2,000 scouts in his hands. Although it was a division-level unit, scouts were not easy to find. Not all soldiers who could kill enemies could be good scouts. In accordance with the principle of better to have nothing than to have something substandard, only these 2,000 people were selected from the hundreds of soldiers in the logistics headquarters. However, these 2,000 people were indeed outstanding people. It was not an exaggeration to say that after a little training, they were not inferior to the soldiers of the 1st Cavalry Division. In fact, they were even better in some aspects. In the end, Su Yunsheng trained these 2,000 people as scout instructors. He was counting on these people to be successful in the future and train and bring out more outstanding scouts. Now that he had an order, Su Yunsheng gathered all these 2,000 people and gathered them on the field of the scouts outside the first city. Su Yunsheng, who had the rank of colonel, was riding on a horse majestically. His eyes inspected the 2,000 soldiers who were standing in a mighty posture. Warriors, we have a mission now. This is also a test of what you've learned recently. People always say that you're a mule or a horse. Now is the time for you to perform. Now, I order you to form a team of 10. Choose a captain and vice-captain. Then the captain will come to me to receive the mission. Now you're dismissed. Chapter 13:11. With 2,000 soldiers in a team of 10, there were a total of 200 teams. With such a large net, Su Yunsheng had installed 200 large cameras and 2,000 small cameras between First City and Shajing City. When the time came, even the slightest movement here would not be able to escape his eyes. He wanted to see who was so bold as to launch a sneak attack on the soldiers of the 5-star army. According to the content taught before, when the 2,000 scouts left First City, it was like a spring breeze and a drizzle. Half of the scouts did not even ride a warhorse. They disguised themselves as ordinary people and mixed into the crowd exiting the city. Then they disappeared into the vast grassland and did not attract anyone's attention. Even the commander of the new army, Tiger Man, only knew that Yang Si had also sent out scouts. As for how many scouts had been sent out, he had no idea at all. Even the current highest-ranking general in First City did not know the situation, let alone the intelligence personnel of the Biming army in First City. They only knew that the new army had sent out all the scouts. They also knew that these scouts were wearing military uniforms and were looking for something in groups. Later, this news was passed to Marquis Wu Qingho, Shiheng, by means of a messenger pigeon. Soon, the news was passed to General Fang Dingshan, who was waiting for an opportunity to continue to attack the logistics and transport troops of the Five-Star Army. Fang Dingshan had long expected that the new army would respond. He had also specially formulated a plan for this. He quickly ordered the Liaodong cavalry, who were looking for opportunities everywhere, to stop all military operations and avoid the limelight first. As a result, thousands of scouts of the new army returned without any results. For half a month, they did not find any trace of the enemy and no more transport troops were attacked. They thought that the enemy hiding in the dark had retreated and reported this to the headquarters of the new army. Tiger Man looked at the report that he was not very satisfied with and said with a dark face, "Let's keep an eye on them for a while." Although he also knew that it was very difficult for the cavalry scouts to move continuously, he did not believe that the enemy would take the initiative to retreat after tasting the sweetness without suffering any losses. As a result, the thousands of cavalry scouts continued to run on the grassland. Sometimes, when they passed by some trees and valleys, their every move was clearly seen by the Liaodong cavalry hidden in the forest. However, because the latter were already prepared, they missed several times. The sudden attack seemed to have faded away with the passage of time. Gradually, more and more cavalry scouts began to withdraw from the battlefield and return to the various armies and divisions. After all, those who could become cavalry scouts were the backbone of the army. It was impossible for them to gather together to complete a mission that they didn't know would happen. The earth seemed to have returned to tranquility. When the last batch of cavalry scouts also returned to the first city to rest and reorganize, the northern Ming Liaodong iron cavalry hidden in the dark began to appear in the sky again like a kite being flown. No, it was the grassland. After a month of ceasefire, the centurion in charge of this attack was named Dong Ping. He was young, bold, and could even be called arrogant. After hiding in the mountains for a month, he suffered a lot. The mosquitoes in the mountains were not to be trifled with. They did not care if you were a general or a soldier. In short, they would bite you when they had the chance. Perhaps it was because of his blood type. Dong Ping was very popular with mosquitoes. When he walked out of the mountains, his exposed skin was covered in red, which greatly affected his glorious image. Dong Ping, who was angry in his heart, naturally couldn't care less about the mosquitoes. He vented all his resentment on the Five-Star Army. After a month in the mountains, they had basically eaten all the food that could be eaten. Now they urgently needed to replenish their food. The Five-Star Army's transport fleet was their best target. Spread the men out and find the closest convoy to us. Surround it and destroy it. Dong Ping looked at the 4 cavalry scouts in his hand and gave an order. Then he led the entire team of 200 cavalrymen and slowly followed behind the scouts. When Dong Ping left the mountain, he was also very cautious. First, he sent out the only 4 cavalry scouts to wear the military uniform of the Five-Star Army. They went out to scout. After confirming that there was no danger in the surroundings, he led the team out. However, he didn't know that not long after he left the mountains, he was discovered by the scouts from the logistics headquarters. Different from the scouts of the new army, these scouts were not discovered by the scouts of the Baiming at all. In addition, some of the soldiers did not ride horses. Instead, they pretended to be wandering civilians and dug holes in the ground. They completely hid themselves in the ground, and only occasionally poked their heads out to observe the enemy. Therefore, their disguise was not discovered at all. Previously, as the division commander, Su Yinsheng had made a judgment. If the enemy was so hard to find, then they must be hiding somewhere. It was difficult to hide the enemy's army on the flat grassland. Only the trees and valleys could be possible. Thus, he placed some of the scouts near these places where people could easily hide and waited for the enemy to appear. As soon as Dong Ping led his team out, the appearance of his 4 cavalry scouts attracted the attention of the scouts hidden nearby. They were hiding in the holes they dug. When they heard the sound of horse hooves, they quietly poked their heads out. When they saw that it was actually their own comrades, they didn't pay too much attention at first. However, Some inexplicable actions of these cavalrymen still aroused their suspicions. When these scouts disguised as 5-star Army cavalrymen left a mark on the ground every time they walked, this made the scouts feel that something was wrong. If it was the 5-star Army's cavalrymen, they didn't need to do this because this area was now under their control. They didn't need to be so careful. Someone who could do this was very likely to be an enemy. When they thought of the possibility of an enemy appearing, the scouts nearby became excited. There were even some soldiers who wanted to directly take down the cavalryman that appeared in their line of sight and interrogate him. This action was stopped by the leader, Li Yun. Li Yun was originally a company commander of the new 2nd Army's 1st Cavalry Division. Because he was very unyielding during the investigation, he was chosen by Yang Si and transferred to the Logistics Command. Yang Si, who thought highly of this person, wanted him to learn more skills, so he sent him to Su Yunxing's Cavalry Division. He was still a company commander there. This time he was also sent out and became the leader of a 10-man squad. Li Yun's personality was unyielding, but when he did things he wasn't reckless at all. He was even praised by his division commander, Su Yunxing, who said that he had a calm personality and was more suitable to become an outstanding scout. When he heard his team members say that they should take down the suspicious person, he thought about it and shook his head. This should just be the enemy's outpost. If we take him down, it's very likely that we'll alert the enemy. It's better to wait and see. He continued to mark out the marching route. The main force should follow behind. As the leader, Li Yun rejected the idea. The scouts who were extremely strict naturally didn't refute him. They stared closely at the route and waited for the enemy's main force to appear. Hard work paid off. More than 2 hours later, Dongping brought 200 Liaodong cavalrymen. They had indeed followed the signs. This was because in their eyes, this route was the safest and least likely to be discovered by the 5-star Army. Leader, there are 200 cavalrymen. A scout said with excitement in his eyes. Fortunately, he didn't forget his own situation and lowered his voice. I saw them. How about this? When the enemy cavalrymen pass by, we will follow behind them. You go and find other comrades with war horses nearby and spread the news. This time, we will eat them and capture them. I want to see which faction they belong to. Li Yun's eyes were also filled with excitement. He knew that this time, they had encountered a big fish. Their team would definitely make a great contribution. The well-disguised scouting team did not even notice the enemy's scouts, let alone Dongping, who was burning with anxiety and was in a hurry to find the convoy to replenish their supplies. They walked past where Li Yun was hiding, and at their closest, they were less than 5 meters away from each other. When Dongping's cavalrymen completely passed by, a soldier appeared like an agile monkey and dashed into the distance, turning into a distant black dot. Captain Li Yun followed behind and led the other members of the squad to carefully tail the target. Dongping was completely oblivious to all of this. Around him, more and more scouts received the news and began to surround the place where they were. Especially when Commander Su Yunxing found out that the target was only 200 cavalrymen, he made a bold decision. This time, there was no need for anyone else to act. The scout team alone was enough to complete the mission of capturing the enemy. On the grassland, there was a convoy escorting supplies forward. It was already afternoon, and the sun shone on the people's bodies, making them feel comfortable without the slightest bit of heat. If a cold wind blew past, the feeling would be even more comfortable. In this kind of weather, whether it was the 100 soldiers in the troop or the 200 civilians accompanying them, all of them had a happy smile on their faces. Sometimes, they would even perform a military and civilian cooperation, singing a few unique battle songs that belonged to the 5-star Army as they walked. It was a scene of unity and joy. The good times didn't last long. This scene was quickly disrupted by the sound of the cavalryman's footsteps. When the company commander heard the sound of the cavalryman's footsteps, he instinctively shouted, "The convoy has stopped. Everyone, prepare for battle." Chapter 13:12. He had long heard that his brother's unit had been completely annihilated by an unknown force. When this company commander had set off, he had been warned repeatedly that if he encountered any danger, He had to protect himself at the first possible moment. Once he confirmed that the enemy was behind him, he had to immediately send out a distress signal. Thus, he immediately set up a defensive formation. The 100 soldiers all held their weapons and stared nervously in the direction of the horse hooves. Not only the soldiers, but even among the 200 civilians, there were a few young and strong men who took the bows and spears handed over by the soldiers of the 5-star army. They were prepared to fight to the death to protect themselves. Only the elderly, children, and women among the civilians had nervous expressions. They didn't know what was waiting for them. While waiting, every minute and second felt like an eternity. Just when everyone felt that their palms were covered in sweat, the enemy cavalry finally appeared. It was a group of 200 cavalry that didn't look like the Biming army's uniform at all. They were like a train speeding along the train tracks. As soon as they appeared, they quickly approached the small transport team. They didn't have any intention of greeting them. The moment they appeared, they were filled with killing intent. It's the enemy. The company commander quickly made a judgment. Then he reached into his bosom and a cylinder appeared in his hand. He quickly pulled it open. Tong! A burst of colorful flames soared into the sky after an explosion. This was the signal for help in a critical situation. When the signal was sent out, the company commander's eyes were filled with killing intent. He was already prepared to fight to the death. He was very clear that with the strength of his company, it was impossible for all of them to be a match for the enemy cavalry. However, he couldn't escape. The only thing he could do was to pin down the enemy and wait for reinforcements to arrive. Dongping appeared. The distance of 3 kilometers could be said to be covered in the blink of an eye. At this moment, his eyes revealed a look of disdain and complacency. The 5-star army's fighting strength had always been powerful. However, that was only for the elite troops. This new army that was responsible for transporting food hadn't been established for long. Moreover, half of them were cavalry and half of them were foot soldiers. Many of them hadn't even been on the battlefield and hadn't even seen blood before. They only relied on their youthful strength and empty strength. How could such an army be a match for their elite Liaodong iron cavalry? Dongping had already started to consider how he was going to eat his fill after plundering the rations of these carriages. He didn't place the 105-star army and 200 commoners in his eyes at all. So what if they were prepared? In the face of his cavalry, wouldn't they have to stretch out their necks and wait to be slaughtered? So what if they sent out a distress signal? In at most a quarter of an hour, Dongping was confident that he would be able to kill everyone in front of him, snatch the food, and run away. At that time, in the vast grassland, who could do anything to him? Once he entered the forest, he wouldn't be afraid even if there were thousands or tens of thousands of 5-star soldiers. His body exuded confidence and his eyes carried a relaxed smile. In Dongping's eyes, this battle was as simple and easy as a hunt. He only needed to open his bloody mouth, and victory would be his. The 200 cavalrymen on the other side came closer and closer. When they could clearly see the viciousness of the other side, the company commander gave the order to shoot. At the same time, he brought the remaining 50 cavalrymen and charged forward. If the cavalrymen wanted to display their advantage, they had to charge forward. The man borrowed the horse's momentum and the blade's speed to display the strongest power. If they just stood there and chopped, it would be like not using bean buns as rations, and not using the village chief as a leader. Xiao 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 xiao. The arrows came from afar, but Biming's Liaodong iron cavalry were already prepared. They only needed to dodge and block to easily avoid the arrows. Other than 1 or 2 unlucky ones who were injured by the arrows, no one died. This was because Biming's Liaodong iron cavalry were well trained, and because the 5-star army had too few archers. There were only 50 of them, so they weren't of much use. Kill! With a loud shout, the company commander swung his saber to the side. Although the situation wasn't good and death was inevitable, he still had to give it his all before he died. Even if he could only kill one person, it would be worth it. Ding ding dang dang. What followed was the sound of weapons clashing. It was like the bell signaling the end of a class. The cavalrymen fell from their horses one after another, just like students jumping out of class. 50 against 200, ordinary soldiers against elite veterans. In just one exchange, more than half of the 5-star Army's soldiers died. Less than 20 of the original 50 cavalrymen were left. The company commander's left arm already had a bloody wound. Under his strength, the blood flowed even faster and soon dyed half of his clothes red. He didn't care about this at all. He had already injured an enemy, so what he wanted to do now was to increase his victory and kill 1 or 2 people. It could be considered finding a companion in the afterlife. Kill. After another loud shout, the company commander brandished his saber and charged forward. Beside him were less than 20 cavalrymen who were lucky enough to survive. Kill. Dong Ping was also shocked by the company commander's imposing manner. After the previous round of charging, one of his men was actually killed and 7 others were injured. This result greatly angered him. He was leading the elite cavalrymen that Bai Ming had spent a lot of money to train. The other party was just a young recruit who had undergone a short period of training. Even if there were 100 of them, they shouldn't be exchanged for the life of one of his brothers. Now that one of them had died, he was furious. He felt that his dignity was being challenged. Next, he wanted to carry out the fiercest revenge. He wanted to let these damned 5-star Army soldiers know that provoking him wouldn't have a good ending. Under 2 loud shouts, the 2 sides clashed again. What followed was another wave of sword light. More than 10 cavalrymen fell to the ground and were buried here. Ha ha! A loud laugh came from the company commander's mouth. This time, he finally managed to kill an enemy with his own hands, but the price he paid was a bone-deep wound under his ribs. However, he didn't care anymore. What he wanted was to kill enough people. That way, even if he died, he could look up to the sky and laugh. Dong Ping's expression became even worse. In the second round of charging, although he killed 13 of his opponents, his side had 2 dead and 3 injured. Looking at the cavalryman formation that only had 6 people, he gritted his teeth and said word by word, "Kill them all. Don't leave a single one alive. Kill." The other Bai Ming Liaodong cavalrymen were also full of hatred. The ordinary 5-star Army soldiers that they regarded as ants actually dared to fight back. They actually killed 3 of their men and injured several others. This was a disgrace. They had to kill all of their enemies to prove that they were a strong army. Both sides were full of anger. Killing intent filled every part of their body. Everyone knew that they would fight until the end. In the end, only one team would be standing here. And that team must be the Bai Ming Liaodong cavalrymen. Xiao xiao xiao. The sound of air breaking suddenly came from afar. Not far from where the 2 sides were fighting, a team of 10 cavalrymen appeared. They were the scouts that immediately rushed over after receiving the news. This team of 10 had been hiding in the dense forest all this time. According to the military order, they did not have any direct scouting mission. Their most important task was to slow down the enemy's escape once they appeared. After waiting for a month and being bitten countless times by mosquitoes, they finally had the chance to attack. 10 elite veterans that were selected from various armies rushed out. They finally arrived at the battlefield at the last moment. 10 arrows were shot out. They pierced through the air and attacked the Bai Ming Liaodong cavalrymen from the side. Unfortunately, because the distance was too far, the arrows fell to the ground halfway and did not cause any damage to the enemy. Ha ha! Dong Ping and his subordinates could not help but laugh when they saw this scene. They were surprised by the 5-star Army's quick reaction. However, only 10 cavalrymen came. Moreover, they had such poor archery skills. This made them relax. These people were not worthy of being called their opponents. You guys go and take care of them. After laughing, Dong Ping did not care about these 10 cavalrymen at all. He casually pointed at a squad leader and asked him to lead the team. The squad leader had 9 soldiers under him. He immediately agreed, and the 10 of them, including himself, went to meet the 10 cavalrymen. They smiled and waited for their prey to enter the net. Then they would show their cruelest side and kill them. Dong Ping was not in a hurry to make a move. He wanted to let these 5-star Army soldiers who dared to draw their swords at him see how he would kill them one by one. The feeling of despair must be very fun and interesting. They're here. Facing the 10 Bai Ming Liaodong cavalrymen who were wearing Mongolian uniforms, the squad leader of the 10 cavalrymen, Zhang Zhou, said softly. When he said this, There was not the slightest trace of nervousness on his face. On the contrary, he looked eager to give it a try. Zhang Zhou used to be a deputy battalion commander in the new Second Army. Although the disciplinary investigation group did not find anything wrong with him, he could not stay in the new Second Army anymore. Therefore, he came to the logistics division and waited to take up a position in another army. In the end, because of his good performance, he caught Su Yunxing's eye and became a soldier in the reconnaissance division. Zhang Zhou, who had been on the battlefield and had seen blood, did not completely change after a period of learning as a reconnaissance division. His personal ability had indeed more than doubled. He had always wanted to show off what he had learned. Now that the opportunity had come, the long-awaited battlefield made his hormones rise. He could not wait to perform well. Chapter 13:13. Zhang Zhou was not the only one who was excited. The 9 squad members beside him were also very excited. Warriors who could become scouts were all veterans who had been through hundreds of battles. They had potential that others did not have. In addition to what they had learned during this period of time, they were eager to perform well and see how much they had improved. The 10 soldiers with different expectations slowly approached. They did not show the slightest bit of fear when facing the 10 enemy cavalrymen. Even though there were close to 200 cavalrymen behind these cavalrymen staring at them like tigers and wolves, they were still fearless. You have some guts, but I don't know if you can maintain your composure under my cavalry sword. Charge! The squad leader yelled and led 9 cavalrymen to charge forward. Although there were only 10 cavalrymen, they still gave off a sense of majesty. Spread out. Facing the cavalrymen who were charging more than 200 meters away, Zhou Hao gave the order the moment the enemy moved. Then, the 10 soldiers separated and each occupied a position within a limited time. It felt like they were fighting alone, but also like some kind of formation. Shoot the arrows. As soon as they finished moving, Zhou Hao shouted. His voice was like the roar of a tiger and the roar of a dragon, spreading far and wide. Dongping and the others who were not far away heard it and laughed out loud. The effectiveness of a cavalryman's bow depended on the distance. If the distance was too close, then the bow and arrow would be almost useless. It was all because the enemy was already in front of you while you were raising the bow. How could you block it? This was also the reason why Dongping and the others laughed. However, their laughter came to an abrupt stop. They all stood there as if they were frozen. In their line of sight, every single one of the 10 cavalrymen had a trembling arrow resting on their chest. After struggling for a while, the 10 of them fell to the ground one by one like ducks being chased into the water. They actually hit the target. In a short period of time, 10 arrows hit the target. This result was really shocking. Dongping and the others were dumbfounded. How could they have known that archery was a necessary skill for a qualified scout? Division Commander Su Yunxing had put in a lot of effort in this regard. After he received the full support of Commander Yang Si, he spent a lot of material and financial resources to finally double the archery skills of the 2,000 scouts under his command. They might not be able to hit every shot, but at such a close distance, hitting the enemy's chest would not be a problem. Just now, the 10 of them had spread out in preparation for the archery. What was different from the past was that these 10 people did not choose the person closest to them when shooting. This was because in many cases, the closer the distance, the higher the accuracy. Humans are alive, but they can move and dodge. It was because of these factors that Su Yunxing's strategy was to shoot at random. Don't think that I will shoot at you just because you are close to me. If you think this way and dodge according to my arrow, then you're making a big mistake and falling into my trap. Because I'm shooting at the person beside you, and the person beside me is shooting at you. In this way, it was really impossible to guard against. A cavalryman could instinctively dodge one person's arrow, but they couldn't dodge multiple people at once. This was why they fell into the trap. This was because their dodging actions were useless. They even got the wrong target, so how could they dodge successfully? Under one shot, the 10 Baiming cavalrymen who were not familiar with this strategy all fell to the ground. Perhaps some of them would not die immediately, but they would still be breathing more than they were exhaling. They did not have much time left to live. Yeah. Accompanied by Dong Ping and the others' surprise and confusion, Zhou's 10 people cheered loudly. Speaking of which, they had only tried this strategy on the scarecrow. This was the first time they had actually killed an enemy on the battlefield. They never thought that they would get the jackpot. How could they not be happy? At this moment, only the cheers of Zhou and the others could be heard on the battlefield. Everyone else was stunned in place. They were all shocked by the scene in front of them. The company commander, who only had 5 soldiers with him, seemed to have forgotten his situation. He also forgot the despair in his eyes when he saw that there were only 10 reinforcements. The hope of survival rose in his heart once again. This is courting death. I will kill all of you. I will capture all of you and torture you to death bit by bit. Above. Dongping finally reacted. When he saw the 10 cavalrymen on the ground, his whole body emitted a cold aura. In the past, when they were carrying out missions, the mission would be considered a failure if one of them died. But now 13 of them had died. Even if he killed the 5-star army and the civilians in front of him, he would still be punished when he returned. If he did not do well, he might even be punished and demoted. When he thought of General Fang Dingshan's cruel military law, Dongping felt his whole body turn cold. He needed to vent his anger. His target was the 10 5-star army soldiers who suddenly appeared. Under the command of above, 50 cavalrymen walked out in a row. Obviously, after experiencing the failure just now, these Biming army soldiers did not want to fight one-on-one anymore. They wanted to fight with numbers. The 50 cavalrymen slowly came forward and gradually formed their encirclement. It was as if they were saying, "We want to surround you, capture you alive and slowly torture you to death." This is a competition of numbers. Zhang Zhou looked at the 50 cavalrymen who were gradually approaching and shook his head. Then he looked back. When he turned back, his eyes were incomparably calm. "Sai, if we really want to compete in numbers, you guys are not a match." As if to prove Zhang Zhou's words, after he finished speaking, more and more black dots appeared behind him. The rumbling sound of horse hooves resounded on the ground again. After the battle just now, more and more cavalrymen from the reconnaissance division had gathered here. 1 squad, 2 squads, 5 squads, 10 squads. In just a short period of time, more and more black dots appeared in all directions. With a rough glance, the number of people was probably more than 500. This sudden change fell into Dongping's eyes. In a short period of time, his eyes were constantly changing. He was actually surrounded. This was impossible. Before the battle, his 4 scouts had already scouted the surroundings and did not find any traces of the 5-star army. What was going on? There were too many questions in his heart. Even though Dongping wanted to get to the bottom of this, there was no time for him to think about it. They absolutely could not be surrounded. Otherwise, once their identities were exposed, who knew what kind of impact it would bring to northern Ming? The reason why they pretended to be Mongolian cavalrymen was because they did not have the courage to face the 5-star army head-on. "Quick, let's rush out. Let's rush out before they surround us," Dongping shouted loudly. Then, he whipped his horse and charged out in the direction where he thought the encirclement was the weakest. Kill. Seeing that Dongping was about to escape, the first person to react was the company commander, who only had 5 soldiers with him. His own reinforcements had arrived. His morale was greatly boosted. He wanted to avenge his fallen comrades. The company commander and his 5 soldiers moved. But what was strange was that only they moved. The scouts that surrounded them did not attack, nor did they run. Instead, they stayed where they were. Some took out bows and arrows, some took out horse ropes, and all of them leisurely looked at the Biming army who were running in all directions. How to attack the enemy when they were still was one of the training courses for scouts. To them, this was a small matter, as simple as eating and drinking. Dongping did not know this. When he saw that the 5-star army soldiers did not stop him, he thought that they were afraid and ran even faster. He urged his horse to gallop, as if he was afraid that the enemy would suddenly turn around and attack him. "Attack!" Someone in the crowd shouted first. Then bows and arrows, horse ropes, and other objects flew out. Some of the bolder ones directly jumped on the Biming soldiers closest to them. It was obvious that they wanted to capture them alive. More and more scouts arrived in the encirclement, but none of them charged forward. They also did not have the intention to swarm forward. Those who came late stood at the periphery. Like this, the encirclement became wider and wider. It gave people a feeling that they could not see the end of the encirclement. Dongping's luck was not bad. He dodged the bows and arrows, and even dodged 2 horse ropes. He was running further and further away. However, the soldiers beside him were not so lucky. When the 5-star army soldiers suddenly appeared, and when their numbers increased, their morale dropped to the freezing point. They no longer had the will to fight, and the only thing left was to run away. However, this wish was hard to fulfill. In the process of running away, they were pulled off their horses one after another. Cries of pain could be heard from time to time. "Quick, leave this place. This is a trap." Dongping constantly encouraged himself. Although he did not know how the 5-star army discovered him and formed such an encirclement, he knew one thing. However, there was one thing that he was clear about. If he stayed here, he would likely suffer a fate worse than death. Good luck could not envelop a person forever. Just as Dongping was charging outwards on his warhorse under the protection of the remaining 2 bodyguards, his body suddenly turned sluggish. Under the powerful force, his entire body fell off his warhorse. The moment he fell, he did not know when the horse he was riding on had been caught by the horse rope. This was also the reason why he fell from his horse. With a plop, Dongping fell from his galloping warhorse. At this moment, Dongping felt as if all the bones in his body had been broken. Pain filled his entire body, making him feel as if being able to take a deep breath had become an extravagant hope. Even so, Dongping did not forget his situation. If he continued to walk, the pain would be unbearable. However, if he did not leave now, he was afraid that he would suffer 100 or 1,000 times more pain. That was what he could not accept. Chapter 13-14. He forced himself to sit up straight, then held his breath and jogged forward. He wanted to escape from this place. He didn't want to die. Swoosh. Dongping, who was running, once again fell to his knees. The first thing he fell to his knees was a lasso rope around his feet. Dongping, who had fallen, felt as if his chest had been smashed by a heavy hammer, making it increasingly difficult for him to breathe. However, the hope of survival still made him force himself to sit up. He reached out his hand and touched his ankle. He wanted to untie the lasso rope and regain his freedom. "Do you still want to struggle?" The person who caught Dongping was Captain Li Yun, who had just arrived. He rode on a warhorse and looked at the struggling Dongping with great interest. Then, with a smile on his face, he let out a frivolous shout. He dismounted his warhorse and immediately galloped forward with all his might. Dongping, who was in the middle of untying the rope, only felt a strong force coming at him. Then his whole body was pulled away. He followed behind his warhorse and lay flat on the grass, allowing the newly grown weeds to continuously rub against his back. Dongping had only been dragged out for 50 meters, but he had already left a long trail of blood on the ground. Dongping was already riddled with scars after being tossed around again and again. Blood had dyed his clothes red, especially the part of his back that was in close contact with the grass. His buttocks had long been scraped open, and a layer of skin had already peeled off. Since Dongping was captured, none of the 200 Baiming cavalrymen escaped. In the end, they were all gathered together. Among them, there were 103 corpses and 97 captives. Division Commander Su Yinsheng appeared. With the rank of senior colonel, he appeared very mighty and spirited. Not bad. Looking at the results of the battle, Su Yinsheng was very gratified. This was the first time they had taken down all the enemies. More importantly, none of the scouts died. Only 7 of them suffered some light injuries during the battle. They would be good men again after recuperating. Find out who they are. Find out where the other accomplices are hiding. Then, report the results to Logistics Commander Yang. Su Yinsheng was no longer interested in looking at the captives. In his eyes, these people no longer posed any threat. There were only 2 outcomes waiting for them. Those who cooperated would live, and those who resisted would die. 97 wounded captives were gathered together. Under the watchful eyes of the cavalry scouts, they knelt in a row. as if they were prisoners waiting to be judged. After Zhang Zhou received the task of interrogation, he strode over to the first northern Ming cavalryman kneeling on the ground with a ghost-headed saber in his hand and asked in a booming voice, "Speak, who are you?" "Umph." Facing Zhang Zhou's question, the cavalryman straightened his neck and raised his head in disdain. "If you want to kill me, just kill me. Why are you spouting so much nonsense? At most, I'll be a good man again after 18 years. All right." Zhang Zhou was not angry at such an answer. Instead, he was happy. "I like tough guys, but I hope you can continue to be tough." As soon as he finished speaking, he raised his saber. When it fell again, a bloody arm flew into the air. With a single slash, he chopped off one of his arms. Blood splattered everywhere, and the intense pain caused the Baiming cavalryman to cry out in pain before he fainted. "You fainted just like that? Boring." Seeing that the Baiming cavalryman in front of him was so weak, Zhang Zhou shook his head in disappointment. He raised his saber again, and a fresh head was separated from the body. "Sigh, he's already fainted. There's no need to interrogate him. Why don't we just kill him?" Zhang Zhou muttered to himself as he walked up to the second person. His face was calm as usual. It was as if he didn't kill a person, but a chicken. Seeing Zhang Zhou walk up to him with his saber still dripping with blood, the second Baiming cavalryman's expression changed again and again. With the previous example, his heart was in a mess. Speak. That would be betrayal. If he didn't speak, he would die. It was very likely that he wouldn't die quickly. What choice should he make? Zhang Zhou didn't give the cavalryman much time to think. To Zhang Zhou, there were a total of 97 captives. Even if half of them died, it didn't matter. In the end, as long as one of them spoke, it would be fine. He believed that among these 97 captives, there would always be someone who was afraid of death. "It's your turn." "Same question. What do you want to say?" Zhang Zhou's voice was very normal. It was as simple and casual as a commoner asking if they had eaten. I. Just as the cavalryman was hesitating, the ghost head saber fell again, and another arm flew into the air. Before it landed, Zhang Zhou's hellish voice sounded. "You're actually a stutterer. How boring." "No, I'm not a stutterer." The cavalryman who lost an arm shouted loudly, but it was the last sound he made in his life. The ghost head saber fell again, and another head was separated from the body. After killing 2 people, Zhang Zhou didn't have any intention of stopping. Compared to these people who attacked the 5-star army and killed innocent civilians, what he did wasn't excessive at all. He took a step forward and arrived in front of the third person. With the example of the first 2 captives, this person was so scared that he lost control of his bladder. When he saw that the person who came was a devil who killed without batting an eyelid, he was completely terrified. Without asking, he took the initiative to say, "We are the Baiming Liaodong heavy cavalry." Pooh! The ghost head saber fell again, and an arm flew into the air. Hiss! This scene frightened the other 94 captives. What? Did he still have to die after answering the question? Just as everyone looked at Zhang Zhou, wondering what was going on, an awkward expression appeared on Zhang Zhou's face. "Oh, sorry, my hand slipped. I'm used to it." You won't die anymore." Zhang Zhou said apologetically to the cavalryman of Baiming who lost an arm, and was rolling on the ground in pain. Pain, unbearable pain, intense pain. Even so, the cavalryman of Baiming didn't dare to faint because he didn't know whether he would lose his value or die if he fainted. "Well, you're not bad. Men, take him away and bandage him properly. I hope he doesn't die." Zhang Zhou ordered his team members. Then he went to the 4th person. "The question has changed. How many people did you bring this time? Where are they?" With Zhang Zhou, the god of death, the captive soldiers were very cooperative. They all told Zhang Zhou everything they knew. Even the injured Dongping was very cooperative. He even revealed his identity and said that he was the leader of the cavalrymen of Baiming. He even said that he was willing to lead the 5-star army to take care of the Baiming Liaodong heavy cavalry hidden in the mountains to atone for his crimes. According to Su Yunqing's instructions, the results were quickly sent to the logistics headquarters via telegram. Yang Si took the results to the headquarters of the new army. The 102nd and 103rd Divisions moved out and went straight to the few forests that Dong Ping and the others had told them about. Surround this place. Prepare the kerosene and burn it. After tens of thousands of cavalrymen surrounded the forest, the commander of the 103rd Division, Qin Feng, ordered his men to start a fire attack. In the forest, 5,000 Liaodong heavy cavalry were hiding. The leader was the deputy general of the Baiming heavy cavalry, Luo Baikuan. Considering that there were too many people for a sneak attack, Luo Baikuan only brought 10,000 cavalrymen this time in order to hide himself better. Originally, everything was going smoothly. They could even eat the food they stole and be self-sufficient. Just when Luo Baikuan wanted to use the battle to support the 5-star army, the situation suddenly changed. The scouts reported that tens of thousands of 5-star army soldiers appeared outside the forest they were hiding in. He had a bad feeling in his heart, but in order to calm the soldiers down, Luo Baikuan said indifferently, "It's fine. Even if they know we are here, they can't do anything to us in the forest." Luo Baikuan was very confident. However, unexpectedly, the 5-star army didn't have any intention of charging into the forest. Instead, they used the most primitive and most direct method of attack: fire attack. On the grasslands, there were many forests, valleys, and hills. Especially the forests, because the environment was well protected, there wasn't a problem of random logging. Dense forests could be seen everywhere. This was the main reason for the instability. However, even if they knew this was the case, they couldn't do anything. They couldn't burn the entire forest, right? If they did, what would they do when they needed firewood to build houses? However, if they had enough information, it wouldn't be a problem to burn only one place. Just like now, the fire was only aimed at the hiding place of the Baiming cavalry. When the smoke rose, all sorts of birds and animals in the forest ran out. Not long after, the Baiming cavalry also charged out. Luo Baikuan couldn't allow his brothers to be suffocated or burned to death. Although he knew that there was a large group of 5-star army archers waiting for him outside, he had no other choice. Other than charging out, there was no other way. When they rushed out, Luo Baikuan had also played a trick. He had divided the 5,000 people into 20 groups. The larger groups had 1,000 people, while the smaller groups only had a few hundred people. The purpose of this was to confuse the 5-star army outside. When the 5-star army was at their wits' end, more people would have a chance to escape. This included himself. In order not to attract attention, Luo Baikuan only left 50 bodyguards behind after he finished distributing the other groups. With such a small group charging out, they naturally wouldn't be a big target and wouldn't attract the attention of the 5-star army. As expected, when Luo Baikuan's team followed behind the other teams, they didn't attract the attention of the 103rd Division. They thought that it was just a small group of enemies. After a series of arrows, Luo Baikuan finally managed to escape, leaving behind 20 or so bodyguards' corpses. You're tuning into the Li Mei's Sword of Destiny YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.